Ladies and gentlemen, we will be commencing shortly. Kindly take your seats. Announcing the arrival of Yang Berbahagia, Tan Sri Nazir Razak, Chairman of Bank Pembangunan Malaysia Berhad. A very good morning and salam sejahtera to the guest of honor, Yang Berbahagia, Tan Sri Nazir Razak, Chairman of Bank Pembangunan Malaysia Berhad, Yang Berbahagia, Tan Sri Datuk Sri Megat Najmuddin Megat Khas, Chairman of the Malaysian Institute of Management, Mr. Sivayanam Rajaratnam, Chief Executive Officer of the Malaysian Institute of Management, MIM General Council members, our distinguished speakers, and to all participants in attendance here with us at our hybrid conference with close to 50 persons at the Le Meridian Putrajaya, 300 plus persons on Zoom, and we are live on Facebook today. Ladies and gentlemen, I am Stella Jacobs, and I will be the MC for today's program. It is my pleasure to welcome you to today's MIM Crucial Conversations titled Beyond a Pandemic, Building Towards a Sustainable and Resilient Recovery After COVID-19. We shall start with the welcome address shortly. Coffee break will be at 10 a.m. and we shall resume at 10:30 with 30-minute slot for each of our distinguished speakers, and thereafter at 12 noon, we shall begin with a panel discussion for half an hour. We expect to end the session by 12:40, followed with lunch. Kindly have your handphones on silent mode or switch them off during the session, and please wear your mask and maintain social distancing. Before we start with the welcome address, we would like to present a short video of the MIM's crucial conversations held throughout this year.
Malaysians have the view that corruption is not a problem that can be solved at the level of government. That corruption, that there isn't sufficient political will at the level of the government, whether we're talking about politicians or we're talking about government officials, there isn't sufficient political will to solve the problem, and therefore the solution lies elsewhere in society, civil society.
So a very strong campaign, is needed by the government to push for digital inclusion and digital adoption. Not just for certain groups of people, but for everyone.
We know that women have made some very important gains in representation, and you will actually see the data and trends that I'm going to share with you, especially in senior leadership. But we also know that the pandemic continues to take a toll. We now know that women are significantly more burnt out and far more increasingly more so than men.
Ever since 1998, Malaysian governments have been in deficit spending mode. In other words, there has been no serious attempt to try to balance the budget ever since then. So every time the deficit limit, the debt limit is raised, it is a matter of some concern.
Place to enable every Malaysian to have a device, connectivity, a device and suitable content. It's from me.
And also, Dr. Shaleen, perhaps, affordability is also important.
Of course, goes without saying.
Because we could have great connections, we could have the device content, but we are looking at the B40 in terms of that.
Ladies and gentlemen, without further ado, please put your hands together for Yang Berbahagia Tan Sri Datuk Seri Megat Nashbuddin Megat Khas, Chairman of the Malaysian Institute of Management, to deliver his welcome address.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Yang bahagia, our special guest, Tan Sri Nazir Razak, Chairman of Bank Pembangunan Malaysia Berhad, Mr. Siva Gundam, the CEO of MIM, and our distinguished speakers, and ladies and gentlemen. Our speakers are as follows today. Yang bahagia Datuk Dr. Syed Tawfik Al-Attas, former Director General of Institute of Islamic Understanding Malaysia, or IKIM, Mr. Sarma, General Partner of ScaleUp Malaysia, Ms. Shafinas Farouk, Partner Workforce Transformation, PwC Southeast Asia Consulting, and to all the participants in attendance, physical and virtual, Selamat Pagi. Ladies and gentlemen, please allow me to welcome all of you to MIM Crucial Conversations, our hybrid conference titled Beyond a Pandemic, Building Towards a Sustainable and Resilient Recovery after COVID-19. Ladies and gentlemen, my sincere appreciation to our long-standing partner, the Konrad Adenauer Stiftung, who have been instrumental in the success of our webinar series. My appreciation also goes out to supporting partners, Federation of Public Listed Companies Berhad, PLC, and the Malaysian Insurance Institute, and also the Bank Pembangunan Malaysia Berhad for their continuous support. The COVID pandemic, ladies and gentlemen, has triggered unprecedented change and appears as a globally synchronized health, social, and economic crisis, which threaten to roll back hard-won development gains. Now, across the world, countries have suffered economic contractions, along with interruptions to trade, broken supply chains, and the collapse of international tourism, leading to widespread job losses and heightened poverty. Everyone, everywhere has had to make changes to the way we live and the way we work. And in October this year, after battling with COVID-19 for more than 19 months, Malaysia was set to move to an endemic stage. And the discovery of a new variant, Omicron, has really rattled markets, and it has now been identified in more than 30 countries. The WHO, or World Health Organization, has declared Omicron as a variant of much concern, indicating that it carries higher risk than other virus strains. And just last week, I understand that the first case of Omicron variant was detected in our own country. So the question at hand is, how do we move beyond a pandemic? And ladies and gentlemen, according to an article published in the World Economic Forum, the COVID-19 pandemic is not only a global health crisis, but it is also a catalyst for reimagining the way we want to live going forward. From economic systems to sustainable development, decision makers have an opportunity to move away from the status quo and make positive changes for the benefit of all mankind. And in addition to this, Malaysia, our country, needs a reset, needs political stability and tough structural reforms to surge forward stronger as a nation. So I look forward to the expert insights and discussions from our distinguished speakers today, and hope that the participants benefit from the key takeaways, which is to understand the best possible approach towards getting beyond this pandemic by building towards a sustainable and resilient recovery after COVID-19, inshallah. With those words, I thank all of you and wish you all to have a good conference. Thank you very much. Assalamu alaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Thank you very much, Yang Berbahagia Tan Sri Datuk Seri Megat. Ladies and gentlemen, please put your hands together for Yang Berbahagia Tan Sri Nazir Razak, Chairman of Bank Pembangunan Malaysia Berhad, to deliver his keynote address on the topic Reflect and Reset, the Path to a Better Malaysia.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Tan Sri Megat Najmuddin, Mr. Siva, ladies and gentlemen. When I was first asked to speak today, I told my assistant that I really could not fit it into my schedule. She replied, but Tun Hanif is the president. And that was that. I don't turn down Tun Hanif Omar. I don't decline requests on someone who I consider a national hero. Tun became our youngest IGP and then our longest serving one. During his career, he witnessed and came to understand so much about this nation. Naturally, I interviewed Tun for my memoirs, which I published recently, and Tun has supported my call for the setting up of a Better Malaysia Assembly, a topic which I will come to later. Let me first congratulate MIM for organizing this episode of Crucial Conversations on building towards a sustainable and resilient recovery after COVID-19. The recent news on the Omicron variant has caused concern, but I think it is one of the bumps on the road to recovery. It is time that we put our best minds together to design a path to recovery that is sustainable and resilient, and events such as this have an important role in adding to the discourse. The current government is indeed focused on this agenda. Malaysia's vaccination program has been one of the most successful in the world. And with arguably our most capable minister now helming the health ministry, Malaysians are entitled to feel less vulnerable or less helpless against COVID-19. And there has been a host of plans for economic recovery and resilience, not least a budget that builds on the latitude of a raised debt ceiling to help those most in need and revitalize our most important economic engines. There are, of course, details that we can debate. And I am sure some of the speakers this morning will do just that. I, however, would like to take a longer lens and argue that while we will recover and we might well become more sustainable and resilient, we will remain well short of our potential as a nation if we do not address our structural weaknesses and undergo a national reset. Ladies and gentlemen, the pandemic is the defining global health crisis of our time. It has taken 5.2 million lives, according to official data, and some estimates have even called the number 16 million. And it has been devastating to livelihoods for all but a few across the world. The impact of the pandemic by country has been varied, though, depending on factors such as living conditions, healthcare systems, government action, and financial capacity. It is extraordinary to think that China lost less than 5,000 people. Maybe it was a little bit more, but China has 1.4 billion people. South Korea, with a population of 52 million, lost less than 4,000 people. It is therefore troubling that we have lost over 30,000 Malaysians to COVID in a nation of only 32 million people. Death is, of course, not the only relevant matrix. In its latest publication last week, the Bloomberg's COVID Resilience Ranking, which combines deaths with overall handling of the pandemic, placed Malaysia near the bottom at 51 out of 53 countries. It is a hard truth that the pandemic wasn't our finest hour. The current much improved sentiments have come rather late in the day. We should not have suffered so much. In fact, one could argue that Malaysia snatched defeat from the jaws of victory. Slightly more than a year ago, July 2020, Malaysia celebrated as local transmissions reached 0 cases for a few days, garnering praise from foreign experts, academics, and organizations such as the WHO. But a few weeks later, machinations on the political front saw a state election in Sabah being called. Research found that the Sabah election contributed to 70% of the cases in the state itself, and at least 64% to the rest of the country. And our COVID stats made for uglier and uglier reading thereafter. In July 2021, Malaysia's daily infection and death rates counts were per capita was so high that it even surpassed India at its peak, putting an unbearable strain on our medical facilities and frontliners. We recorded the highest per million cases in Asia and one of the highest per million deaths in Southeast Asia. And Malaysia went into extended lockdowns with debilitating impact on businesses and the most needy. Historians and researchers will debate what went wrong for a very long time. They will highlight the Sabah elections, weak enforcement of MCO rules, double standards for politicians, the inability to change individuals in leadership positions no matter what they said or did, the limit to government financial capacity due to years of excessive spending and leakages, and poor social safety nets. In my view, however, what is most important is the fact that these are symptoms of a system that has not been fit for purpose for a very long time. Just as people with comorbidities tend to suffer worse from the virus, Malaysia entered the crisis with pre-existing conditions: endemic corruption, political instability, slow economic growth, high talent outflow, and persistent intercommunal tensions. These set the stage for the unfortunate political shenanigans, constraints on political decision-making, weak government finances, and economic vulnerabilities. Whether it was PH or PN or BN in power, Malaysians would probably still have suffered more from COVID-19 in both healthcare and economic terms than their counterparts in most nations. Ladies and gentlemen, the 2020 pandemic has made the case for a national reset even more pressing and compelling in my view. As we know, Malaysia underwent a national reset in response to the crisis of May 13, 1969. Yet COVID-19 crisis has resulted in even more damage to lives and livelihoods than the crisis of May 1969 did. What was our failing this time the result of poor leadership or a poor system? One barometer for me is the number of good and honorable people that I know that have gone into politics with the best of intentions who quickly find themselves having to compromise on their own principles or not being able to achieve much, or more often both. We have also seen that since the 1990s, many administrations have tried but failed to reform the system. And since 4 years ago, we have had 4 different prime ministers despite voting only once. It is difficult not to conclude that our system is the real problem. A new leader, a new government, even GE15 are unlikely to solve our systemic dysfunctions. Our prevailing system remains essentially the one designed in the early 1970s following deliberation by the National Consultative Council, a 67-person deliberative platform that produced reforms such as Rukun Negara, Amendments to the Sedition Act, and affirmative action as innovative ways to respond to the needs of the nation at that time. But these reforms were not designed to last indefinitely, and in the case of the NEP, a 20-year term limit was set. This national reset took place 50 years ago, and even though so much has changed for Malaysia and Malaysians, the system remains substantially in place. In its early years, the new system was largely successful, bringing much-needed political stability, accelerating economic growth, reducing poverty, and rebalancing wealth between communities. But the system also had negative side effects, namely heightened corruption, hardening of identity politics, and concentration of power. These grew in prominence as the system was prolonged. These negative side effects feed on each other and are at the heart of Malaysia's problems. Furthermore, the system grew resistant to reforms, and the Abdullah Badawi, the Najib, and the second Mahathir administrations all began with promises of substantial reform but failed to achieve material change. In many instances, piecemeal reform proposals were quickly given racial or religious overtones by vested interests and effectively resisted. Ladies and gentlemen, just a few weeks ago, on behalf of a diverse group of 55 Malaysians well known in their respective fields, I wrote to His Majesty Yang di-Pertuan Agong to seek the support of the Council of Rulers for the formation of a new deliberative platform called the Better Malaysia Assembly, or BMA, after its all-encompassing agenda. By a better Malaysia, I mean one that is politically more democratic and stable, economically more dynamic and conditioned to face pressing challenges such as the Fourth Industrial Revolution and climate change, and socially more just and aligned with our original aspirations of becoming a Malaysian nation. By an assembly, I mean embracing deliberative democracy and convening a group of citizens to deliberate on issues and make recommendations to Parliament for reforms. The letter has garnered a lot of attention in support and in opposition. I welcome them all, although I prefer comments from people who have actually read the letter themselves, and not those who feed on other people's misunderstandings or prejudices. A surprising reaction was one that said I was out of date because the idea is reminiscent of the NCC of 1970s. Personally, I do not see anything wrong with borrowing from the past, especially methods that have worked. Indeed, this approach enabled us to successfully rebuild this nation after May 13th. More jarring is the fact that since 2011, deliberative democracy has become cutting edge in political science, with some 289 platforms set up at various levels in democracies across the world. As a sign of the times, Yale and Stanford universities have recently set up deliberative democracy centers. Oxford is expected to follow suit. Another notable comment was that the idea was somehow elitist. Deliberative democracy is essentially a citizen-centered approach to policy making, often established to address complex long-term structural issues unsuited for Parliament. We are witnessing more deliberative platforms being formed as there has been increasing frustration with representative democracy for failing to address major structural issues, mainly because parliamentarians tend to need to prioritize the short-term interests of political parties and their own re-elections. It is telling that in the last few days, community NGO leaders of IKIM and IBIM have spoken out in support of BMA, as has the General Secretary of the National Union of Bank Executives, who, incidentally, used to burn my effigy when I was the CEO of CIMB. What is more elitist to me is to rely on advisory councils that are solely appointed by the government of the day. Deliberative platform or citizens' assemblies are typically dominated by non-partisan intellectuals and randomly selected citizens representing various social segments and stakeholders. Thus, they are generally devoid of political grandstanding and focus on the nation's long-term best interests. In the letter, we propose that members of the BMA be selected via a process involving the Prime Minister, the Leader of the Opposition, as well as civil society, with any deadlock being resolved by the Council of Rulers. How will the BMA operate? A citizens' assembly is typically formed with clear terms of reference as to what questions the assembly is expected to consider and how the recommendations will translate into policy or impact decision-making. Research has shown that this setting augments consensus building. People with opposing views are more inclined to look for common ground, and those with conflicting interests look for compromise solutions. For greater impact, the recommended reforms are commonly arrived at through closed-door deliberations to guarantee privacy and to ensure that the Assembly members can speak freely. Nevertheless, the Assembly should seek to leverage on technology to engage the public in order to enhance quality of deliberations and sense of national inclusivity. The recommendations of the Assembly would then be submitted to Parliament for consideration, debate, and a parliamentary vote. Parliament could also, of course, choose to put the recommendation to a national referendum. This entire process would not undermine, but rather enhance our democracy. Ladies and gentlemen, one of the most popular case studies on deliberative democracy is the Citizens' Assembly of Ireland, convened to deliberate on various issues, but most notably the constitutional prohibition on abortion. Before the 100-person assembly convened, it was polled that only a quarter of the population favored legalizing abortion. But after lengthy deliberations, some of it aired in public, the assembly recommended legalizing abortion. An incredulous parliament decided to send the recommendation to referendum, expecting defeat. 2/3 of the public voted in favor instead. What does it say? One or two things. One is how detached the view of MPs can be from the public at large. Two, how the deliberative process can actually influence public opinion in the right way. In 2020, the French Citizens' Convention on Climate was formed to recommend a range of measures to combat climate change in a socially just and equitable manner. Other examples of deliberative democracy in action are can be found in Iceland and Chile, where involving the drafting of national constitutions, and in some Latin American countries to determine national budgets even. The role of the BMA that we are proposing will be to focus on, firstly, a reaffirmation of the principles of Malaysian nationhood and our implicit social contracts, not just between ethnic groups, but between the government and the governed, covering many important issues. Following that, deliberations and recommendations on how our democracy, institutions, and economy should function, including, but not limited to, issues of electoral system, political funding, federal-state relations, role of institutions, affirmative action, social safety net, and education. And finally, the BMA should identify the specific policy and legislative changes required to put Malaysia on the path of a national reset. I estimate the process to take between 18 months and 2 years. Ladies and gentlemen, in conclusion, I think we can all agree that we, as well as our future generations, deserve and can have a better Malaysia, even if we don't agree on how to achieve this. Malaysia is at a crossroad and time is of the essence. Technological and industrial transformations are creating conditions in which countries either leapfrog more advanced ones or fall by the wayside. Success belongs to those who seize the initiative, first and foremost by ensuring domestic socio-political strength and economic dynamism. Malaysia cannot hope to compete without a comprehensive national reset. In other words, a holistic overhaul of our democracy, institutions, and social economy. The Better Malaysia Assembly is merely a proposal on the process for the reset. It would be a difficult process, no doubt, but that is not a good reason not to step forwards. Still, if there is a better way, I would love to hear of it and support it. What I am sure about is that we are a nation in decline, and hence this bold, some say foolhardy move to table the idea of a Better Malaysia Assembly. I thank you very much for your attention. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Thank you very much, Yang Berbahagia Tan Sri Nazir, for sharing the insightful information. Ladies and gentlemen, we shall now begin with our Q&A session.
Yes, I will moderate this. Any questions from the floor first? I'm sure, I mean, the speech has been very inspiring as far as I'm concerned. I mean, we are trying to do, in fact, a revolution of sorts for this country. Is that possible? Think about it. We are multiracial, multicultural, multi-religious. How are we going to find a common goal, a common kind of thinking towards improving this country, towards resetting this country that we love so much? Any views from the audience? Or from those online? Yes, I can't see, sorry. Just go ahead. Introduce yourself first. A lady, that's very good.
Hello, good morning, Tan Sri, all the Tan Sris and Mr. Siva. My question is...
Your name, please? I'm
Tarika. Yeah.
I've
lived in Malaysia for 31 years, but I'm not Malaysian. I was born in Sri Lanka. I think...
Sorry, I couldn't come a little bit. Yeah.
Hi, okay. I'm Tarika. So I've lived in Malaysia for 31 years. It's a beautiful country. One of the best in the world after I've traveled all over, even in Southeast Asia.
Where were you from?
I'm from Sri Lanka.
Oh, Sri Lanka, okay.
Yeah.
Lovely, lovely, lovely place. Yeah.
Thank you. And my question is, isn't it better for all of us to be Malaysians rather than be Malaysian Indians, Malaysian Chinese? You know, sir? If you, like just now Tan Sri said, you know, if we want to reset, I think we just have to be one. That's my question to you all, like being one, will it make a big difference? Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Tarika, and totally agree with you. But I think we need to be realistic about identity, right? The fact is, we have a nation-building project which started at independence. I remember I was with Tun Musa recently, and he said, Nazir, remember that this, at the beginning, we always talk about the Malayan nation-building project. Yeah, and we look in those terms because we have to be realistic about what we inherited at the time of independence. You know, the British kept us living separately, interacting only in the marketplace, and you know, even your ethnicity even determined, you know, your job functions and your economic position almost. So it does take time to create this new national identity. And at the time of independence, we made certain decisions that may not have been the best for nation building, and this includes our education system, etc. In 1970, we discovered we had to make further policy changes, which, you know, included this affirmative action, etc., to rebalance wealth between communities in order to set the foundations for nation building, right? You know, people talk about affirmative action being unfair between communities, etc., but in truth, the intention was to create the foundations for nation building. My argument today is that those very noble objectives were correct for the time, but if we look at the situation today, those policies have lasted for too long, and we need to review them together with other elements. And I also argue that there have been side effects such that, you know, our ethnic identities have grown stronger rather than our national identity. So we need to really start this national conversation of how to get back to that nation building project. That is the essence of this, my argument about identity. And, you know, my strong position is that we have to start this national conversation, and the best way to start this national conversation is an offline deliberative platform.
Well, really breathtaking, actually, the things that are being said by Tan Sri. I totally agree with him, but I'm just wondering, how are we going to do it? We are so divided by race, religion, etc., etc. And if I go to the social media, racism is very much alive in this country, in this beautiful country of ours. We like to think it doesn't exist, but it does. But how to break down all those barriers? Tan Sri?
No, I mean, we don't even define what's racism. You know, I used to have this youth football team that I coached. And I remember they were playing a match. And during the match, these kids were racially abusing each other. You know, and I got so angry, I stepped on, I started berating the referee. I said, you know, you cannot allow kids to call each other these names. The referee thought I was a weirdo because he couldn't understand what was wrong, you know, with the things the kids were saying to each other, right? And the truth is, we've never legislated what is racism. Right, and we definitely need to do that as part of this whole conversation, Tan Sri. And you remember back at school, right? Those days, and what, you know, our caregivers were teaching us as well. There really is a lot of work in order to kill racism and build this new nation. And it ain't going to be a short-term project. It's going to be multi-generational. And to me, it really starts at the schools, it starts with our teachers. So there's a long, long list of things we need to do But we ain't going to even start to do if we don't have that deliberation of what to do.
Any questions or any comments? This is, yeah. Please introduce yourself, yeah.
My name is Mahindran. Like what some of you have said, when I was schooling, I had many Malay friends, Chinese friends. We played football together. There was slight name callings, but not an issue. It was a friendly thing. That was not an issue. But likewise, I've told my nephew and niece that they should mix around. They said, no, in the school we don't mix around. I say, why? They say, even though the Malay friends, they come and talk to them for a while, then they move away. They say, no, my other Malay friends will say something, and they move away. So I've always encouraged my nephew and niece to do that. But one disappointing factor he told me, it was really surprised, and I must share here so that you can bring up to the relevant authorities as well, that there was an election, the house campaign, you know, green house, red house, so forth. And my nephew, though the students, most of them are Malays, he was elected to be the captain for that house. Then the teacher said, election should be one more time. They had like 4 or 5 times until the other Malay boys, he won the 4 or 5 times, and the other Malay boys shouted at the teacher, well, I won't say shouted, at the goal, you know, say, Cikgu, biar aja lah, you know. Then the teacher backed off and allowed him. When my nephew told me that, and I was surprised, can it be that bad, you know? This is just sharing what has happened in the school. So what I'm trying to say here is, you and I can talk about it, we can have a drink, we can laugh about it, we can straight away handshake and get along. But what we should do is, we should start from the school children. If it's affecting there, I'm sad to see, I don't think we can do anything about it. We should start there. Thank you.
In fact, I think we should start with the teachers themselves and also parents.
Yes.
Parents as well, because
Yes.
parents are sometimes quite racist as well.
Yes.
You know? Nazir?
I do agree. I do agree.
Many of these stories, I'm sorry your nephew had to endure that.
But it's okay, because we were supporting, at least he's talking to us, and so we can guide him. What worries me is some boys may not be talking to their parents, or maybe the parents are not talking to them to address this issue. Then there will be a problem. Thank you. I'm glad that you are taking this initiative. It may or may not work, but somebody along the way, along the years, someone have to take it up until more and more people will be like-minded by your good self, then things will change. Thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate that. And, you know, I'm totally convinced that this assembly will happen in the next 1 year, 5 years, 10 years. It will happen. My only hope is that by the time it happens, the cost will not be so high. Yeah, if you look at nations across the world, if you look at this kind of national recalibration process with deliberative assemblies, etc., a lot of them happen after tragic events, like the Asian financial crisis in Indonesia, the end of apartheid in South Africa, or May 13th here, right? You know, I hope we don't have to wait, because you can actually see that's the direction we're headed, unfortunately, right? We should be bold and step up and say, no, let's not wait for that. You know, the problems are so clear. Let's have a national conversation. I don't understand why the opposition to have a national conversation. You know, I know parliamentarians keep saying, hey, no, well, Nazir, why do you want to do that? We can do it ourselves. We can do it in parliament. Really? You guys are so worried about being re-elected? You guys say you're going to represent us for the next 5 years, but actually your votes are, you vote according to what your party whip tells you to do. And I don't disrespect you for doing that. That's the reality of politics, right? And you guys have a job to do, and you have a government to check on, and that's fine. But what we want is to recalibrate, to reset the nation, to deal with long-term structural issues, to set things like how we elect our representatives, etc. This cannot be done by parliamentarians. We need to go offline. Yeah, and other countries are doing it, and I really can't understand why the opposition to this idea.
Very good retort, that one. Any questions, please? Yes, please.
Good morning. My name is Aaron. I'm from ScaleUp Malaysia. I'm actually a speaker later, but I thought I'd take the opportunity to make a comment and ask a question as well. I think what you're doing is very exciting because as an Indian, from a Malaysian of Indian descent, I've always felt kind of disenfranchised from the political kind of environment because I felt that the ability to effect change is limited given the fact that I will never be in one of those positions where a decision can be made, right? So I think what you're talking about here is very exciting because it answers that disenfranchisement kind of question. And also, there's a whole cohort of young people who feel this way, right? Whereby the two big parties elephants are fighting, and obviously the conversation's always around I'm better than the other guy rather than policy and how to make the nation better. So I think this is very encouraging. My question is, how do we encourage, when the process takes place, that we ensure that there's a level of transparency in the deliberations? And I think this speaks to that whole elitist kind of perspective where people feel that it's people smoking cigars in the back room making decisions rather than talking about issues where people can contribute and give ideas. So how do we ensure transparency in the process? And I guess the second part would be, how do we ensure that there's the ability to have teeth or enforcement, right, from these policies, and when it actually becomes real policies that affect the lives of the average Malaysian? Thank you.
Thank you. Two great questions. In terms of transparency, I think what is important is that the debates are closed door, right? As you know, this BMA has to debate very sensitive issues. And we don't want people to be exposed, right? And I think that's very legitimate. If you look at, I tried to research NCC of 1970, there are no minutes, right? They intentionally did not allow minute taking. There are a few speeches by the Tun Ismail and a few others, but there are no minutes. So that people felt free. They can, and they were pretty robust discussions those days, yeah? But with technology today, there can definitely be engagement. And those engagements one is to actually update people on, the progress without going into details of who said what. And also to get feedback and ideas. I mean, technology today, you can have an election on single items every day, right? On every item, right? So we should evolve that. I think a deliberative platform today can be extremely powerful because of technology, extremely inclusive because of technology. In terms of effectiveness, whether the recommendations will be implemented, I mean that we must respect the democratic process. It has to be tabled to Parliament, and Parliament has to decide. And in Iceland, they came up with fantastic recommendations after the global financial crisis when Ireland economically was brought down to its knees. They spent a few years coming up with constitutional reforms. They tabled it to Parliament. The economy had recovered fully and was thriving. Parliament just rejected the recommendations. So it can happen. It can happen. But that doesn't mean that we shouldn't try or shouldn't go through this process. I think what is important is that once this recommendation comes out, the parliamentarians must feel that it would be bad for them if they don't support it, because the public supports it. And so that is up to this assembly to engage the public and make sure that their recommendations is popular. And let me just underline one point here. In Malaysia, given our diversity and strong political identity in politics, the recommendation has to be a package, right? You cannot have just a change in one thing, right? You look like the PH government wanted to introduce UEC, should I? Because the Malays would say, oh, this is anti-Malay, right, or whatever. So we need to do a package. So perhaps we could do a package, say, okay, vernacular schools, another 20 years. Affirmative action, another 25 years. Is that the deal to be cut between communities? So these are the things that we have to bundle together and recommend to Parliament.
That's a great response to your question. Thank you, Tan Sri. Any more? Let's look for solutions. Make suggestions. We know the problems.
Good morning, Mr. Siva, Tan Sri Magat, and Tan Sri Nazir. My name is Asohan. I've been in the field of human resources for the last 30 years. And I'm very glad that Tan Sri has come out with this initiative. And so coincidentally, you have been in CIMB. I used to call CIMB as Chinese, Indian, Malay, and Berlainan. So you have actually created something very inclusive, which is good. I would like to support your initiative. In fact, just to tell you a bit background about why we need to have this reset. In 2014, when I authored my book, A plus B equals to C, which is attitude plus behavior equals to character, I was giving back from the industry back to the schools, actually. I felt that there is a lot of issues in the industry. If you're talking about true productivity, we don't have it. A very classic example, if you look in 2019 in terms of the GDP growth, Singapore achieved 372 billion. We achieved 365 billion. With a 5.7 million population against a 33 million population, indirectly saying that we have 1 Singaporean for 5 Malaysians. So it doesn't augur very well. So the only way we need to reset that part of it is back to the education system. We have compromised the whole system. Indonesia was not so fortunate as Malaysians will be because Indonesia was ruled by the Dutch. If they were ruled by the British just like us, I think they would have been far exceeding us. So going forward from 2014, I decided that to leave the corporate world to serve back the nation in a different platform all in. So in 2018, I was very excited when there was a change in government, there was a change after 60 years. I felt that we could see the light and really knowing that what earlier people used to say that it's Swarna Bhumi, a land of gold. But so coincidentally, after 22 months, what came as PH as Pakatan Harapan, it became Putus Harapan. Very sad. So what we need to do is that in 2018, I wrote 3 letters. One is to Tun Dr. Mahathir, then to the Education Minister and to the Human Resource Minister, because these 3 areas are very crucial, which talks about human development. So to Tun Dr. Mahathir, I wrote to him saying that we don't have a race and religion issue. I think the people, you can see, we want to be harmonized. We believe in harmony. The problem is the issue of governance, the people who are governing us. So that has to change. So the narrative, in order to change, I proposed something to Tun Dr. Mahathir at that time that in order to bring back all of us together, to strengthen our unity in diversity, something known as national values. Time that we embrace national values, which is what Tan Sri is talking about now, which coincides and echoes that very well. So that is the one way of doing it. So going forward, I think Tun heard about it. He passed it to the National Unity Minister then. I don't want to mention names. Apparently nothing came out of it. So in 2019, I decided to go further on this matter and started an NGO called PUPO. PUPO stands for Persatuan Usaha Sama Perkembangan Ukhuwah, in terms of brotherhood citizenry, where we talk about collaboration. If you look at the Thomas Kilman's conflict way of managing, I think if we can go into a collaborative way, that's where things move. So from there onwards, I have been pushing this agenda, and recently I came out with another program called Nurturing Through Governance to actually train the parliamentarians in order over 8 weeks program with some speakers around, and apparently that also fell in deaf ears. So Tan Sri, I am asking in the sense that we have so much of slogans. Recently we have the current Prime Minister talking about Keluarga Malaysia. Many of them say either Keluarga Malaysia or Keluarga Malaysia. So which is which now, and how do we move from here actually? Thanks, Tan Sri.
Tan Sri.
Well, there was a lot in your comment there, thank you. But let me just touch on a few. One is this comment on Indonesia. And that's very interesting because to me, the clearest sign that one should be more optimistic about Indonesia is the fact that the guy who so successfully set up Gojek is the Minister of Education, right? I mean, it's extraordinary if you think about it, right? A young guy, yeah, who built an incredible business, has put it aside, has become Minister of Education, and is setting the policy of future generations of Indonesians. That's why I'm bullish Indonesia. I've worked in Indonesia for a very long time through, of course, CIMB, and thank you for reminding me of that little joke about CIMB, and I was very proud every time I heard that. But let me say that, you know, when people reflect on that, and they think that CIMB was multiracial and merit-based, it is true, but it doesn't come easily. Yeah, and I remember I had to intervene in teams. Right, every time there was a team, every team head used to want to hire, want to hang out with people like him or her, right? Go makan together, etc. Humans are tribal, and in order for us to be multiracial, right, truly diverse, all of us need to go against what comes naturally. Now, that is what it means to be diverse. Yeah, people used to look at CIMB and say, oh, he gives non-Malays a fair chance. It's true, but I beat up on everybody to make sure that they were diverse. Yeah, and everybody needs to do that in order for this to be a more diverse and united nation. In terms of your ask about where we go from here, I think, you know, I've covered that in the speech, and, you know, I really hope that, you know, sooner rather than later, we set up this offline platform to discuss, and many of those ideas that you championed, for instance, right? You did it the traditional Malaysian way because all other ways don't work. Go straight to PM, right? And the PM has gazillion things on his desk, and I'm amazed that he picked your idea. It must be very good because you competed against gazillion for him to take it up, but then the next layer will jam it, right? And that's typical Malaysian way lah. Yeah, but actually, if we have a more methodical way for you to come up with your idea, and we can table your idea into a platform, right? So we can then, you know, filter it down and, you know, sort of bring it into our deliberations. That would be fantastic. Yeah, and that is what I mean. That is deliberative democracy, because we don't just leave ideas to be the monopoly of the MPs or the parliamentary process. We get ideas from everybody.
Thank you. Siva?
We'll take some questions from our participants who are online. And this is a question from one of our participants is, what is your advice for corporate culture on solution to put sentiment of solidarity above ethics and race? Perhaps you can share your previous experience in CIMB, since we know CIMB had its presence in different countries in Southeast Asia.
Yeah, I mean, I was always very clear that, you know, CIMB needed to be driven by a mission, right? And that mission transcended whatever biases or whatever that people came at. And we needed to create a unity within CIMB, not just of Malaysians, but of Indonesians and so on. But, you know, maybe I'll just highlight a slight aside from this, which is that what was amazing is that when we traveled, when we operated in different countries, the most effective professionals were the Malaysians. Because Malaysians actually engage across communities, across cultures, much easier than others. You know, and therein lies the strength of this country. That's why one can be very bullish about this country if we get it together. You know, diversity is our second nature. The world is becoming more and more diverse, right? So the world is playing into our strength. And that's why, you know, I'm so desperate for us to fix this nation, because our potential is huge.
Thank you, Tan Sri. There is another question. How do we go about having a national reset for Malaysia to address political and social issues when majority of the citizens which decides who governs and what not, does not have any interest in improving Malaysia and is blinded by the kindness of corrupted officials, the cycle would only repeat. How can we change this attitude to improve Malaysia as a whole?
Well, I think people need to be led. And I believe in, people are never black or white. People are always gray, right? In their attitudes. And I think you need to lead them in the right direction. I fundamentally believe that the average Malaysian, for instance, even though he may benefit from a corrupt system, if you explain to him that this is not really the right or good way forwards, and there is a better way for all of us together, he or she would buy into it. I'm convinced of that. And if you look at in the 1970s, Hong Kong was one of the most corrupt places in the world. And what massive transformation they had. They went through this whole process of creating an anti-corruption agency and an amnesty program, etc., that really transformed Hong Kong overnight in terms of the extent of corruption in society. And that is the scale we need to do. And don't underestimate the extent of corruption in this country. You can't. I mean, it's so deeply embedded in our system. And, unfortunately, the reality is that if very few companies, very few businessmen have been able to progress without compromising. That's the truth. But because they progress and compromise a little, do you want to put them at risk when you tighten, right? This is why in an anti-corruption drive, one needs to seriously consider some form of an amnesty code for society.
Thank you, Tan Sri. And also, Tan Sri, congratulations on your recent launch of your book, What is in a Name? And in that book, you had mentioned that most important legacies of your late father, Tun Abdul Razak, lies in more intangible set of values, principles, and methods applied, while the tangible institution, policies, or program that had been established may or may not be applicable or could be different for times. Tan Sri, can you please elaborate some of this intangible set of values and principles that your late father applied?
Yeah, thank you. I mean, it is an important point that I wanted to make because, a lot of people defend stuff that he put in place, institutions or policies, and yet, I think he would be the first one to say, look, we must be methodical, right? We must do things that are needed for society, for the challenges of the time, not just defend something that was created in 1970 because, it was relevant then. So my argument is that what's more important is to remember Tun Razak for the values and his methods. And if we go into them, I mean, he was unusual in the sense that he combined many traits. Like he was very self-assured, yet he was a team player. And this is an important point because he was very, self-confident that way, such that he was, he was able to bring a lot of strong personalities and great minds around him. When Tun Razak became leader in 1970, the first thing he did was he appointed Tun Ismail as his deputy. They used to compete, yeah. And Tun Ismail, he would speak his mind even to his boss. Yeah, and if you look at the generations of leaders that were around Tun Razak, who then became our leaders, you had the young Mahathir, the young Musa, the young Rafidas, etc. People even then you could see one day could be leaders. Unfortunately, today in politics there is a real dearth of leadership talent, and yes, there are many reasons, but one reason is that we have many leaders who are not self-assured and are not comfortable with having strong personalities or good people around them, right? He was, what are the other traits? I guess he was a rooted cosmopolitan, I called him in the book. That means he was a kampong boy. He knew what his agenda was. He never lost sight of the importance of helping the poor Malays. But at the same time, he was very cosmopolitan. He was comfortable in the White House or such international settings. So, the rest you have to buy my book, Siva.
Yes, and please don't forget it's also available online. That's it. Yeah. It's going to be a top seller soon, Tan Sri. Tan Sri, this one last question, Tan Sri, if you don't mind. There's definitely a visible lack of leadership in the country, and you have been one of Malaysia's most successful businessmen, and you have repeatedly pursued the National Consultative Committee, and you spoke about it in even 2016, the NCC2, and now you're looking at the Better Malaysia Assembly. Would you consider looking at a political career as an option to drive this agenda?
No, 110% no. Because, somebody said, oh, you must walk the talk. You must go into politics. I said, if I go into politics, I cannot talk. I must talk depending on what my party leader tells me to do. I must talk depending on what my election requirements are. I want to speak my mind. And I must jack some other people, yeah. But, I want to be able to speak my mind. I want to contribute to this discourse. I want to help change Malaysia. And we all have our roles to play. My role is not to go into the political turf. That's for other people. Yeah. For me, I just come up with this idea, push this idea. I don't think I need to go into politics. In fact, I don't think I would be, my chances of succeeding with the BMA is even less if I go into politics. But I hope some of the political parties would take it up. I mean, I'm glad, Syed Saddiq has come out in support, Lim Kit Siang has come out in support. I hope all parties come out in support, and I would welcome if some of the parties or all of them put it in their GE15 manifesto. But in terms of the listed candidates, I will not be there.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Tan Sri. It has been a very invigorating and very inspiring time that we had with you. Thank you so much for being here and to be with us.
I would like to thank the audience for all the questions from the floor and the audience who are also joining us virtually. And without further ado, the Malaysian Institute of Management would like to present a token of appreciation to Yang Berbahagia Tan Sri Nazir. Thank you, Yang Berbahagia Tan Sri Nazir, Yang Berbahagia Tan Sri Datuk Seri Megat, and Mr. Sivayanyam Rajaratnam. Ladies and gentlemen, that marks the end of the first half of the hybrid conference this morning. We shall take a break now, and the session will resume sharp at 10:30 a.m. Refreshments are served at the ballroom foyer outside the hall. We would like to thank Yang Berbahagia Tan Sri Nazir for his kind presence this morning, as he has to take leave to attend to other matters now. Thank you.
Malaysians have the view that corruption is not a problem that can be solved at the level of government. That corruption, that there isn't sufficient political will at the level of the government.
The MIM Digital Marketing Specialist Program was designed by local and international industry practitioners with the aim to equip all participants with strategic, tactical and technical knowledge to immediately upskill them with the skill sets, employability and increase the demand for their services.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back. It gives me great pleasure to introduce our next speaker for the day, Yang Berbahagia, Datuk Dr. Syed Ali Tawfik Al-Attas, was the former Director General from International Institute of Advanced Islamic Understanding Malaysia, IKIM, from 2005 to 2009. At the appointment of the 5th Prime Minister of Malaysia and subsequently worked in the corporate sector. He holds a PhD in Islamic Thought from the International Institute of Islamic Thought and Civilization, ISTAC. He has published several academic works, including a guide to philosophy, the Hidayat al-Hikmah of Al-Bahri in 2009, has written many articles and delivered lectures on a wide range of subjects at various venues, both locally and internationally. In addition, he has been appointed as a member to several advisory boards. His topic for today is Tough Structural Reforms to Accelerate Malaysia's Imminent High-Income Status. Yang Berbahagia, Datuk Dr. Syed Ali Tawfik Al-Attas, will deliver his speech virtually. Please put your hands together for Yang Berbahagia, Datuk Dr. Syed Ali Tawfik Al-Attas.
Thank you, Madam MC. Actually, we have to clarify that this topic that was suggested, tough structural reforms to accelerate Malaysian imminent high-income status, was not one of my choosing. It was one that was given to me by the Institute of Management. Since it's only been a week since I knew about this, so, you know, I mean, it's something that I was more or less obliged to do. I want to thank the Malaysian Institute of Management for the invitation. And I also wish to say that I think it's a very optimistic view to think about beyond the pandemic, building towards sustainable and resilient recovery, since we are still in the midst of a pseudo lockdown. And I'm afraid I must apologize that I can't be there with you all today. But I think before we begin, I must at least thank the management of MIM and also the organizers and the sponsors. Let me begin by asking this question. When is this pandemic scheduled to end, or when do we think it's going to end? Because now we are talking about beyond the pandemic. We are assuming that the pandemic will be over soon. And I don't know whether this is actually something that we can confidently say is going to happen soon. Because if we look at 2 years ago, at the initial stage of this pandemic, Malaysians, in other words, all of us, were all compliant followers going into lockdown, and we were together lionizing the health services, the health minister, the government. We were saying that they were doing good. People felt a sense of solidarity. However, this quickly evaporated as soon as the vaccines were introduced. And then the hint of the mandate, introducing vaccine mandates. This began for us to witness as a sort of technology-driven solution introduced by profit-driven companies with a very pedestrian explanation given relative to its safety, going to the fact that it was new technology, coupled with the fact that the discussion turned to either mandating these vaccines and then demonizing those people who questioned the legitimacy of these vaccines, the safety of the new technology, and so on and so forth. And then those refused to comply and get vaccinated by virtue of those very concerns we just spoke of. Then what you get is you see this division happening in society. No longer are we the people with a sense of solidarity. Now we are people with division, because that very technology has fueled fear. And as you know, fear is a very good driver of anger. And then it also fueled abuse, especially against those people who spoke out or who voiced their concerns about what the technology has done, that the difficulty in getting their voices heard, no matter how diplomatic they were, and even though they may be doctors, virologists, epidemiologists, or even just people with some kind of reason and knowledge, you find that these kind of people who are questioning this technology and the vaccines and the legitimacy of these new technological vaccines, they get deleted from social media. The worst part is that this has become normalized, that this demonizing of people who question. Because simply by saying fake news or misinformation, these people with legitimate concerns and legitimate questions have been demonized. So now what we see is that the media tech giants, they have become authorities on what is fake or what is misinformation and what isn't. They are the ones now who determine what we can and what we cannot say. So we have to ask this question then: what better way to advance corporate greed than to have a pandemic? It appears that this authoritarianism is far more obvious than before. Now, if we remember, towards the end of the 19th century, Malaysia's cohesion, we had a deep sense of religion, of culture, of civilization, of tradition. And we also had a deep sense of reason. But then this continued perhaps till about maybe the mid 20th century or later. And then we started seeing a shift towards progress and towards an emphasis on science, towards an emphasis on advancing science and materialism. But then now, I must say, I feel that we have become dependent on technology in the name of science. This technology is masquerading as science. And I've also noticed that reason has become no longer a dominant feature of anything, whether it be science, whether it be technology, whether it be culture, whether it be civilization, whether it be tradition, whether it be religion. And this is a very worrying and disturbing trend. Now, having said that, I mean, why is Malaysia silencing and demonizing those people with concerns? Our health minister recently asked or recently questioned, why is it that people are refusing to get vaccinated now? But the truth of the matter is that I don't think he's listening. I don't think he's listening to any of the concerns. I don't think the government is listening. They are more concerned with authoritarianism and of trying to implement a mandate for this vaccine, implementing, vaccine passports. And I don't think that's right. I don't think this is actually what freedom is. I don't think this is what actually we imagine to be freedom either. If he says that he doesn't know the reason why, maybe we can offer some solution to what his questions are. Now, those people who I mentioned earlier, the ones who have been demonized, although they are virologists, epidemiologists, doctors, and so on and so forth, scholars, people of reason, they have been looking at the developments of this vaccine technology. They have been looking at the consequences of this vaccine technology. They have been making comparisons with other countries in the world as to how successful how they've dealt with this pandemic has been. And a lot of the times, their suggestions are also quite relevant, but we are not listening. I find this to be very troubling, which means that a lot of the people who have voiced their concerns are being ignored. And those people who are refusing to get vaccinated is precisely because there's institutional distrust. They don't have any more trust in the institutions. If we look at the comparisons between how we have done in terms of the pandemic and how other countries have done, even though we have vaccinated quite a substantial segment of our population, we can say with relative certainty that these vaccination exercises, not just in Malaysia, but in other parts of the world, have not been as effective as we first thought. And yet, we are still thinking that we are going to eradicate this problem. I personally don't think this is going to be something that we can eradicate. Rather, we're going to have to live with it, and we are going to have to manage it and control it. But in order to do that, we need to have proper managers of this problem. And at the present time, I don't see that as something which is sustainable. We don't have the proper management skills, precisely because we are ignoring some data in favor of others. And it looks as though these profit-driven corporations which have offered their form of vaccine have had more influence than those who haven't. I'll give you an example. Let's take a look at Japan. What has Japan done? Now, Japan, even though 76% of their population has been vaccinated, saw an increase, a very marked increase in infection, in this COVID-19 infections in their population. And this alarmed the Japanese government to such an extent that in August of this year, I think it was mid-August sometime, they decided to change tactics. They were still vaccinating their population, but they decided to allow for a certain anti-parasitic drug to be allowed as treatment in Japan. And 12 days later, the numbers of people who were infected with the virus began to drop very significantly as well. Now in Japan, the doctors can prescribe this anti-parasitic drug without any restrictions. So if we look at it today, new cases in Japan have dropped to nearly zero. The new deaths in Japan have dropped to nearly zero. Whereas in other parts of the world, like the US, the UK, and Europe, and Canada, for instance, the number of new cases is on the rise. The number of new deaths is on the rise. So this tells us that Japan is doing something which is effective. And yet we are not taking those same steps. We are not allowing doctors to prescribe this anti-parasitic medication without restriction. On the contrary, we are resisting that, and we are preventing doctors and hospitals to prescribe these medications freely without restriction. And therefore, we have to ask this Minister of Health, how many in Malaysia, how many of the younger population are dying from non-COVID related diseases, from heart ailments, etc.? And is there in Malaysia a correlation between the vaccinated young people who are dying of these heart attacks and the vaccine? How much money, for instance, how much money are these big pharmaceutical corporations investing in Malaysia for medical research, for instance, any kind of research and technology, research and development, sorry? How much is the big pharmaceutical corporations investing? How much are the big media giants investing in Malaysia for research and development? Now, we know very well from our own publications that Malaysia does not invest much in terms of research and development. In fact, we invest less than 1% of our GDP for research and development. And where is that money going to? A large proportion of that money, it goes to the services sector, rather than to universities where research and development is paramount. We don't seem to think that that is something which is viable for us. And that is a big mistake, because this now has a correlation with what we are going to be talking about today, or what we are talking about today. If we look at the goals of the Sustainable Development Goals of the United Nations, which has been published recently, they themselves have said that these sustainable goal developments have to be delayed by 10 years as a result of this pandemic. Where does that leave Malaysia? What about IMF's Global Economic Outlook of 2021? They have already reported how dependent Malaysia is on China, and yet the China's economy is not doing well. There are huge bankruptcies in the real estate sector. Hundreds of billions of dollars cannot be recovered. And where does that leave Malaysia? Malaysia depends on Chinese growth. And yet if China itself, the economy itself in China is not doing well, where does that leave us? We all know that if we want to retain some kind of a resilient economy, what we need to have is good, qualified human capital. And this is something which Malaysia has not been emphasizing, I'm afraid to say. So, again, we have to ask that question, where has reason gone? Now, if we want to talk about a complete reform, because this is about tough structural reforms to accelerate Malaysia's imminent high income status, at the present rate, we are not going to achieve high income status, I'm afraid to say. These structural reforms involve state institutions. These state institutions need a complete reform from the ground up. We need to have innovation. This is critical for Malaysia. We need to have political stability. That's also critical for Malaysia. We don't have any political stability now. We don't have any kind of semblance of a democracy. What we have now is more akin to a demagoguery. We need to have proper and good leadership, which we don't have. And we need to have strategies that look towards the future. What are we going to do in the future? Look at Singapore, for instance. They are our neighbors, and yet they have had excellent strategies, and they are looking to the future towards 2050. We don't even have a strategy to look to 2030. And this is important because I gave a lecture before about this, that by 2030, the population of the world will increase to about 8 billion people. Of course, now with the pandemic, that number has to be revised. But at that time also, we were talking about areas which we need to emphasize before 2030, one of which was climate change. Another one was, where are we going to get our energy from? Where are we going to invest in renewable energy sources? We haven't done much of that. What about our water? In 2030, where is our water going to come from? Judging from the fact that today we are quite cavalier about our water, that we don't mind polluting all our water sources, that our water catchment areas have become more or less redundant. What about our food technology? What about our food production? What about our food security? We don't have any of that. What about healthcare, biodiversity? How much of the forest, for instance, in Malaysia remains? How does urbanization affect Malaysian biodiversity? Now, the last one, which I think is probably the most important, is what about waste? Waste management. What will we do by 2030? Where are we going to put all of this? Instead of importing waste from other countries and dumping it here, what are we going to do with our own waste? None of these concerns has been addressed yet. And this lecture I gave about 4 or 5 years ago, when we were still talking about Malaysia towards 2030. I don't think this is a very good trend. In fact, if we were talking about institutional reform, state institutions need to be completely reformed. If we want to talk about high development income, then we need to have good human capital. The only way we can do that is by investing heavily in education. And what I mean by this is we need to invest heavily, particularly in the university education, tertiary education. And we need to put a lot of money into research and development. But because we have very poor leadership, very poor politically appointed opportunists who run the university, we don't see the kind of development that we are desiring, nor that what we need. And therefore, this is something which is critical now. We need to invest in education. Now, Malaysia has missed the boat as far as I'm concerned. We can't go back to the 90s when Malaysia was rich and flush with lots of money and capital, thanks to the computer chips that we were producing in Penang for these Western corporations. We don't have that luxury anymore. We've gone through the 97 Asian financial crisis, then in 2008, the global financial crisis, which was largely due to the banks' mismanagement and corruption and greed. Now we are still in the same boat. Greed has still overtaken us. We haven't overcome that problem yet. And this kind of thing should be addressed in the universities. We should begin in the universities. We need to reform universities. We need to pay emphasis to social aspects, humanities, instead of emphasizing all of the, what do you call it? What do we call those things? The science, engineering, mathematics. What was the other one? Anyway, I think you understand what I'm talking about. We emphasize those a lot. We don't emphasize the humanities. I think there should be equal emphasis on both. On the one hand, we have the sciences which drive the economy more or less, but then we also have the humanities, and we need the humanities because that is what makes us what we are. This is the kind of thing that can give us an emphasis on reason, reasonable thought. This is what we can do to advance our logic, our language, our culture, our civilization, and ultimately our humanity. If we don't, then we are going to suffer even more than we are now. Now look at our energy resources. We are going to be depleted by 2034, perhaps. This is what the predictions are. After that, what do we do? How have we invested in energy resources, renewable energy resources? I don't think we have done much in that. The universities here are, institutions of higher learning here are, what do you call it? They are prevented, they are hindered by the political interference. There needs to be a certain degree of independence in the universities, which we don't have today. We don't have proper, we don't have proper curriculums. We don't have proper MQAs. We don't have any of that. We don't have university independence when it comes to that, to develop the curriculum, to decide how our university is progressing. We have all kinds of laws in place, but we are not implementing the laws in the right manner. If we don't entertain these questions that I asked just now about energy, food, water, and waste, and climate change, we are not going to benefit. In fact, we are going to be one of those who are the losers. Now we can see already now in the drive towards the fourth industrial revolution, we've put so much emphasis on technology. We have technologized our whole country, and therefore now we have become dependent on technology. No longer are we using reason anymore. Our intellect has become redundant because we just depend on technological advancement, which is actually lending into this fourth industrial revolution and enriching those technological giants, enriching Silicon Valley. Why do you think people in Silicon Valley and the technological giants, the billionaires, why do you think they are investing now in arable land? That seems very strange for technological giants to start thinking about farming. What they're doing is they are trying to control the future supply of food. Now that is going to be something in the future which is going to lead to war. It's going to be the source of war. Food production will become so modernized that only those countries interested in high tech will be able to rule and will be able to make any kind of profit. I'm sorry, it seems to be frozen on the screen. I don't know whether you can hear me or not. I don't know how much time I have either because it's frozen on the screen. Anyway, the point I'm trying to make here is that I think we need to seriously think about, what do you call it, tough structural and what do you call it, reforms. If we are going to think about Malaysia even coming out of this pandemic in relatively good form, and a high income status is not achievable as long as we have the same kind of redundancies in place. And if we don't reform institutional reforms, if we don't reform these institutions, state institutions, if we don't become a country of innovation, if we don't have political stability, and more importantly, if we don't have these strategies which look to the future, we are not going to advance. On the contrary, we are going to be left behind. This fourth industrial revolution, it does not involve Malaysia, to tell you the truth. We are not one of the top 25 countries in the world that is driving this revolution. We are not the giants of artificial intelligence, nor are we the giants of robotics. These are the Western giants. These are Western corporations, not Malaysian, not Malaysian. So I don't think that we are going to be able to compete with these giants. And therefore, what are we? Are we just going to become end users? Are we going to become producers? What is it? We have to decide. And I don't think we can do this without this innovation. And innovation is dependent upon human capital, which again is dependent upon education. We are not investing in this, particularly, as I said, in the universities. We are not putting R&D into universities because we are like the politicians. We are thinking that we need to have an economic outcome without realizing that research and technology, the money spent on that, we will be lucky to see 10% of a return. But it still needs to be done. It's very important. I think it's sufficient what I've said just now. But I think we need to think about these things. Thank you very much for your indulgence.
Thank you for the insightful sharings, Yang Berbahagia Datuk Dr. Syed Ali Tawfik Al-Attas. You actually finished right on time. Thank you so much. Ladies and gentlemen.
I didn't know this because I'm frozen.
Oh, okay. Can you hear me now?
No, I can hear you. I just can't see anything, and I don't know what the time is.
Okay, but you've finished right on time. Thank you so much. Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, we are broadcasting today's hybrid conference from Le Meridian Putrajaya. We've got close to about 50 attendees that are present here today, 300 plus attendees joining us online, and we are also live on Facebook. As we will have a panelist session after our third speaker, audience present here with us can come up to the mic to pose your questions. Participants online can send your questions in the Q&A tab in Zoom, and attendees via Facebook can post your questions via the chat section. So without further delay, please allow me to introduce our second speaker for the day, Mr. Aaron Sharma. Aaron Sharma is an entrepreneur with experience in technology, digital media, and retail. In 2015, he founded Tourisly, which later rebranded to Vidi, which was sold to AirAsia in 2017. He served in AirAsia Group in various capacities to develop Travel 360, Big Life, and was COO of AirAsia.com. In 2019, he joined the Malaysia Digital Economic Cooperation, MDEC, as a consultant to work on several national strategy papers. Currently, he serves as a general partner at ScaleUp Malaysia, an accelerator looking to help startups build and scale to the next level. ScaleUp Malaysia has announced investments in 21 companies and have been recognized as one of the most active investors in Southeast Asia. In 2020, he co-founded a venture builder called Remote Ventures that helps entrepreneurs get from 0 to 1 by providing technology support and seed funding. Remote Ventures has launched 2 ventures, namely AskB, a homework help edtech app for K-12 students, and Hola, a celebrity engagement platform for labels and independent artists. His topic for today is accelerating the digital agenda to restart post-COVID-19. Kindly put your hands together for Mr. Aaron Sharma.
Good morning to everyone here. Hi, my name is Aaron. I must say, it's very fresh to finally be able to speak in front of real people. It's been so long. It's been almost 2 years where I've been speaking in front of screens, but now I can see the whites of your eyes if I can't see the whites of your teeth. So it's a pleasure to be with you today and to share on this exciting topic. The topic we're sharing about is about accelerating the digital agenda post-COVID-19. Thank you for the wonderful introduction. As was mentioned, I am a general partner in ScaleUp Malaysia. We help early stage companies go from 1 to 100, right? And we're working with some very, very exciting entrepreneurs. But something happened when we first started ScaleUp Malaysia. We had a choice. We had launched our program, and our program involves, we bring in companies who have, they have a product in market, they've got some technology, they've got some customers, and they want to grow and scale their business. We launched in 2019, and guess what happened in 2020? It was the infamous pandemic that we're all still in, kind of, yeah? And we then were faced with a choice in April because there was a lockdown. And at the lockdown, we knew all businesses were having a tough time. What more early stage companies who are barely making revenue, let alone profit? And then we were faced with a choice of whether to spend investors' money in investing in those companies. But we did. We said we're going to help entrepreneurs at the very earliest stages develop their companies, because we felt this was really important to us. Part of what we believe in is helping these guys with dreams and ambitions to create something new in the world. And so we did. We invested in 10 amazing companies. And I'll share stories from these companies today. The headline was, COVID or no COVID, our accelerator invested in 10 companies. And that was a decision we made to support these companies. Since then, we've run another cohort where we announced investments in another 11 companies. And we've just started our third cohort where we're working with 20 companies, and we'll select another 10 companies that we'll invest in January next year. Here are our companies. We've got these amazing guys from different industries. Just now we heard a bit about agriculture. So we've got agriculture companies, agri-tech companies. We've got companies who are in the home renovation space, in the travel space even. TripCut, or now it's called TixCut for that matter, was a company that we invested in the pandemic when nobody was traveling, right? We have a company called Batik Boutique we'll share with you about later. So we've got different companies in different industries and verticals, be it fintech or health tech or agri-tech, and we're very excited to kind of support these companies as they grow their business. Over the last year, we've seen some really good results, even though it's been a pandemic. So we've had these companies raise a total of 57 million ringgit since we invested in them. One actually raised it from a blue chip investor, and we've had an exit in 18 months. So one of the companies actually sold to an Australian stock exchange listed company just a couple of months ago. So we're very excited to see how these companies are growing, and we're very excited to support these early stage companies. Because we're real believers in the digital economy. And just now in the introduction, we were talking about how I left AirAsia to work on some policy papers. Because I really believe that the digital economy is going to be extremely powerful in the way we move forward from COVID and even in COVID. Malaysia has a history of launching a whole bunch of roadmaps. In fact, there's a joke that we launch a roadmap every 6 months, right? And so just on this list alone, and we've got the ICT roadmap, we had the e-commerce roadmap. Earlier this year or last year, we launched the National Digital Economy or 4IR Blueprint, which is the My Digital program. And just a couple of weeks ago, we launched a startup roadmap called Super, or the Startup Ecosystem Roadmap. We're also really, really good, as you can see, with our choice of acronyms. But along the way, this has actually given us some decent results, actually. Malaysia is viewed as one of the top countries when it comes to digital economy. We're growing in a very encouraging way. And all this is set behind the backdrop of what's called the fourth industrial revolution. And you've heard the last speaker talk about it as well, about how we've grown from early society being in what we call Industry 1.0, to the secondary society where we're doing more industrial stuff, building factories and more irrigation techniques, settlement, that kind of stuff, right? But now we've actually progressed further. We now have what's called Industry 4.0 and the fourth industrial revolution, which are actually a couple of other things. And all these things lead into what we call the digital economy. These are technologies such as big data, social media, software as a service. And all of us live this today. I mean, how many of you guys checked your Facebook before coming to this session or opened your Instagram account? I think most of the people in the room did that. People actually raising your hands. Thank you for the confession. Some of us actually on TikTok watching people engage on social media. Social media and the digital economy has become such an integral part of our lifestyle. The pandemic has also helped this as well. How many of you have ordered food on Grab or Food Panda or AirAsia deliveries over the last week? Most of us have, because it's such a normal thing. In fact, a lot of people are saying it's even better than going to the stores, because it's much more convenient. I can sit in my house in my pajamas, and great food that I used to eat comes. And this has caused tremendous change in the marketplace. But what's really exciting is fourth IR technologies. This is the next stage of growth, and we'll talk a little about this later and how we can take advantage of it. But this is stuff like AI, the blockchain, cybersecurity, things that are going to take us to the next level of growth, where technology won't be a thing that we interact with on a phone, but technology will be a part of our lives, integral to every part of the way we live. Which is why I believe that the digital economy is going to be so pivotal to the way we grow the economy. It's going to be so important for us to develop this as a way for us to move out of the pandemic into growth. And as a nation, this is an opportunity for us. It is an opportunity for us to reset from where we were before and to reset into a digital economy. Because I truly believe the future of the economy is digital. What happened in the pandemic? A couple of things happened besides the fact that now all of us have to wear masks everywhere and use an app to access a mall or a favorite restaurant or even this hotel that we're in. Firstly, customer relationships changed for businesses. And all of us changed our customer relationship with the favorite places we go to cut our hair or to have a meal or to even just to get a product. We went online. And businesses had to adapt. Many businesses were not ready for this, and that caused much consternation with a lot of entrepreneurs. Financing also changed because we had a situation where the demand dropped for certain industries, and they had to find ways to keep ends meet. If you were leasing a property, suddenly your tenant said, "Oh, I can't pay anymore because I got no sales. What am I going to do?" And we had to figure out ways to finance these companies. And thankfully, the government did a really good job coming out with various policies and stimulus packages that all start with P for some reason to help entrepreneurs and business owners. The other thing we saw was a change in the supply chain. Things could not get delivered to people in the way they used to get delivered to people. And we all remember the story. I don't know if you remember last year, there was a famous story about how the Cameron Highlands plantation farmers could not get their products delivered to their customers. And that is another thing that happened in a really, really big way. And now even around the world, especially in the Western nations, you're seeing massive supply chain issues where they can't get simple produce in the supermarkets and shopping malls. This is happening because things have been disrupted as a result of the pandemic. Another thing is people have changed. People are now thinking differently in terms of how they engage with the real world around them. Many parents that I'm speaking to are talking about never sending their kids back to school ever again. Maybe we can do homeschooling for the rest of their lives. And they're all with me. There's an entire body of literature you can read if you just Google it about how young people are saying, "I don't want to ever go back to the office because it's so great to work in my pajamas and go down for coffee whenever I want it and deliver my favorite food to my house." So these are changes that are happening as a result of what has happened over the last 18 months. The question is, how much will this last and how long will this last? But I think there's already enough evidence to show that a lot of these behaviors are going to continue for the years to come. And finally, and we'll talk a lot about this today, it's about technology. Technology has really ramped up. Where before, businesses and individuals would see technology as something, I can do it lah. My kids will do it for me lah. But now we're seeing older people figure out how to use Grab. My grandmother can use Grab, right? Young children are able to interact online. I've got 2 daughters, and they spend time playing with their friends, playing Minecraft and Roblox online. It's like their own virtual playground. So people are changing in the way they're interacting because of technology. But I'll share a couple of interesting stories about how business were impacted, and then we'll go into other case studies, right? The first thing is how supply chain were impacted. And we mentioned this earlier about how farmers couldn't get their produce out. A lot of producers couldn't get their produce out to the market. And so what has happened as a result is, how do we respond to this? What happened was, people like Zara kicked in. And they said, no, we'll solve this problem for you. We'll create an entire campaign. This is actually a campaign that's running right now. Agencies such as MDEC has come about and really promoted this, where you can support local producers with fruits and vegetables and stuff and get them delivered to your house. So really excited to see how the market has reacted and moved in such a way where you can now get produce done because of technology and because digital companies and digital businesses are able to adapt. Another thing is accelerated digital adoption by SMEs. Many restaurants who never relied on delivery services suddenly decide they're going to do it. Many companies got a Zoom subscription for the very first time because of the pandemic. Where things were optional, it became compulsory. And now that it's compulsory, we're seeing whether it'll become permanent. But indications around the world show that the future of work has changed because people are now looking at work very differently thanks to the pandemic. And you can see the acceleration just happening on a year-to-year basis because of what has happened because of the pandemic. Remote work, and we talked about this just now, has become the norm. This conference is an example of this. We're quite comfortable having speakers call in from the house, right, and talk from the house, and we have people who can come and speak live because this is now normal for us. But the challenge with remote work has always been that it's not something that's equally distributed, right? And so this is something that's been also a challenge as a result of the pandemic. Not all industries can work remotely. Not all people can too. And you can see here from this little stat that there is a disparity between urban and rural communities when it comes to remote work. But these are things that have happened as a result of the pandemic. So let's talk about how the digital economy has helped businesses in this pandemic. And I will break it down to three main ideas here. Firstly is it's helped with the revisioning of business models. And we'll cover a couple of case studies as we go down in the next couple of slides. It's also efficiency and ease of operations. Some people have actually realized it's way more efficient to not have people come to the office or to not have people come to the malls. I just deliver it directly to your house. Some people have realized that, right? And it's also encouraged revenue diversification, where people used to be reliant on one way to earn money. Now they've figured out other ways to earn money. In fact, a huge trend is in young people saying that I don't want to start a job, or I don't want to start a full-time job. I'll rely on the gig economy because that pays me better and I get to control my life. So that's a very interesting trend that the pandemic has created as well. So I'll share a couple of stories. I'll be talking my book here. These are companies that we've invested in through ScaleUp Malaysia, full disclosure, but I think these are really interesting stories nonetheless. So this is a company called ATX, right? They help mom and pop stores digitize, right? And they've also worked with state governments, and they've worked with other parties within the country to help. And they install like POS systems in these stores. They also have like a payment app so that people can buy produce and they can get it delivered to their shop. Right now, they do 500 million ringgit worth of transactions a year, and over 50,000 people have received benefits through ATX. It's one of our companies we're most excited about. Recently, they were acquired by an Australian stock exchange company called Novati, and we're very proud of how they're doing. But ATX is one of those companies that we think has done tremendously well, but it shows how digitization of even mom and pop stores. And these mom and pop stores, by the way, are not the 7-Elevens of the world. They're the uncle who lives down the street from your house, right? They are the guys that need to digitize, and that's what ATX does as a business model. Here's another company. It's a company called Fee54. Now, if you want to know why it's called Fee54, it's because, remember Jack and the Beanstalk, right? Fee54 Farms. I know, super cheesy and corny, which is why I love that dad joke. What they do is they help agropreneurs or individuals who want to get into agriculture. They get a plot of land, they invite the agripreneur over, obviously they sign a contract with them, and the agripreneur can then plant their crops. And they built a technology system. I don't know if you can see the charts on the side, but that's their platform, where they can show you data on how your crops are doing, whether it's enough water, whether there's enough humidity in the air, whether there's enough fertilizer on the crop, if you've tended to it well enough, and they've built this entire system around it, right? And it's to help improve the efficiency of the plantation, so that you can get more yield on your crop, right? They've also done work now. They're working now with Felda to kind of roll it out to other plantations around the market. And this is really exciting because it's opened up doors to people who never thought they'd be farmers. Whereas previously, farming was something that was generational, where you were born a farmer. Now people, and they're seeing this, urban people say, waking up, you know what? I don't want to go to a stiffy office and wear a suit every day. I want to work on a farm. And they've allowed people now to go and choose this as a career because technology has made it easier to do, the barrier for entry is lower, and it's more efficient now. And in the long run, this will help with food security for the country, and they've got really exciting plans. They've just raised $3.1 million US to help grow the business across the region. BIB is another exciting company that we really like because it's a bit more of a fun company. How many of you guys do marathons? Nobody fit in this room? No? I'm assuming people, yeah, we got one. You're the fit one. I've not done a marathon, in full disclosure. But BIB helps you do running, and this is Shi Yong, he's the founder, but helps you do it remotely, right? And anyone can use this app and run. And during the pandemic, guess what happened? They did tons of virtual races online, where you could run around your neighborhood, but actually you're running with a whole bunch of other friends, right? And a whole bunch of other people running together. So far, 23 million kilometers have been run on BIB. And so we're really excited for them as they build these virtual runs. They've worked with big brands such as Universal Music and a couple of other brands that can't recall right now. And they've really done really well bringing this concept to the market where people can get fit in a community fashion online through a digital tool. Yeah? And they've done a whole bunch of campaigns. This is one of the campaigns they've done. There's a finance minister right there who's also kind of been a part of one of those races that they were a part of. This is another company I'm really excited about. It's a company called Batik Boutique. Batik Boutique sells, as you can imagine, batik, right? But the interesting thing about Batik Boutique is it started by an American lady from Texas who was in Malaysia doing tourism, and she realized that there were people around her area who didn't really have good jobs or didn't have opportunity. And she liked the idea of batik. So she actually helped a bunch of impoverished women living in the flats nearby learn to make batik. They created a factory. During the pandemic, when people needed PPE, their factory actually made PPE. And this is what they were doing originally. They've now sold Malaysian batik to 35 countries around the world. Really exciting to see how they've grown this business from just helping people as a social enterprise to actually a global business selling products all over the world. If you want to know, they got some really nice stuff at Batik Boutique. You can go online and purchase them, no matter where you are in the world, or you can go to their stores, which are down in KL. AskBee is another platform we're really excited about. We launched this earlier this year with the Remote Ventures team. And part of it is because a lot of people are anxious because of taking exams because of the COVID restrictions. And earlier this year, there was a challenge where SPM students were going to do SPM after over a year of not going to school, never actually going to class, and they were going to do arguably the most important exam of their lives to that point. And so AskBee launched with a simple app that helped you get homework help from teachers. So we've got a couple hundred students come aboard the platform, and 1,000 teachers work with us. People like Teach for Malaysia came on board, Taylor's College came on board, Street KDU KL came on board to help us. And so it's really exciting to see how, with this kind of solution, kids can now get education and get help with their work using digital tools like this. So these kind of some of the exciting ventures we are really seeing in the digital space. So what are the opportunities for digital Malaysia, right? Firstly, it impacts society. Having us grow our digital skill set in our workforce will create job opportunities for digital skills workers. And this is a huge thing that I think will be a huge thrust. And even the speaker before me also mentioned this as well, because I'm going to talk about it as well, that this is going to be a huge key and an opportunity for us as we go forward. The next thing is the government can also use digital technology to improve service delivery. We talked a bit earlier in the first session with Tan Sri Nazir about transparency in the government, about efficiency. One of the things I realized working with a lot of government agencies is that many of the ministry websites look like they were built 10 years ago. And we're supposedly in full IR. So technology is an opportunity that we can have today, where people can see tenders go live. They can see how it's being awarded, who is receiving the contract. These are things that I think are really important as we grow Malaysia to become a more transparent and digital economy. And of course, businesses, which is something that we spend a lot of time with is businesses also will be able to generate new models, new products, new services, like the models we showed you just now, right? The other thing is larger market catchment for commercial activities. You're no longer bound by the 30 million people who live in Malaysia. You can now sell your product to anyone, anywhere in the world. I'll share a really cool story because it came in the news about 1 or 2 weekends ago. I don't know if you read this. It was in the papers. So Visitra, she's a painter, and she did her own paintings. She had appeared in galleries all over Malaysia, also around the world. She wasn't really getting the kind of traction she wanted. She always felt that she didn't have the right opportunity. And of course, there's maybe a comment about discrimination there. But then she saw an opportunity in NFTs. So NFTs are non-fungible tokens, as they describe it. The basic thing is, and I don't want to get too much into the technicality of it, you can sell a digital picture online, but it's got like a signature on the product so that nobody else can own it except you, right? It uses the blockchain, and it uses that as a way to do the transmission of the transaction. And the really, really neat thing about it is that because of the NFT structure, she will earn a revenue every time this digital picture is sold moving forward, because she'll earn a commission or royalty every time, which doesn't happen in the real world. Right now, if you sell a painting, you put it in your house and you sell it to somebody else, the original painter gets nothing. But with NFT, that's different. So she's actually built an amazing business selling all over the world. She's producing art constantly. If you follow her on Twitter, she's on fire on Twitter, actually. And she's sold up to 1.5 million ringgit so far online without ever meeting the people who bought her art. How amazing is that? Living in Malaysia. And so that's the opportunity that the digital economy brings to us, especially with these new technologies that are coming in. And I mentioned also there, Snoop Dogg and a whole bunch of other American celebrities also bought the art. Snoop Dogg has actually DM'd her, and they've talked about it as well. And so I felt what is called the fear of missing out. And so I also bought a piece. So, and then she also thanked me online. So it's pretty cool. And it was a great experience for me as well, because I'd never bought an NFT piece before online. And so learning how it's done and how all the newfangled ways to do it was quite interesting. So very interesting story, very inspiring story of a Malaysian entrepreneur, painter actually, a creative person, finding a revenue stream outside thanks to the digital economy. But as a nation, there are some places that we do kind of fall short. And let's address them, right? Firstly, again, as we mentioned just now, there's a shortage of digital adoption and talent in the market. How many of our people actually know how to use these tools? We had a very, very rude awakening because of the pandemic, when we realized, oh my goodness, my staff can't do Zoom. Oh my goodness, my staff doesn't know how to use the internet properly. They don't know how to do e-commerce. That was a huge challenge. The other thing is the widening disparity in digital adoption among businesses, which again was a rude awakening because of the pandemic. But it's still not enough. There's still a whole strata of society who've never gone online and have no desire to do so. And I think that is a bit of a stumbling block for the nation, because we need to get these people to go online. Another issue, which is a kind of a hot rod issue, is how the internet is not as prevalent all across Malaysia. And so we, especially those on this call probably and those in the room, we live in KL, pretty comfortable, internet's great. But the second you leave KL, not necessarily the case, especially if you go to more rural areas. We all remember the story of the lady in Sabah, right, who went up on the tree to get internet, right? And so I think this is a huge thing that we need to solve. And I know the government is doing that with the Jendela program to kind of expand delivery across the country, and the 5G networks. But this is something that I think can be improved upon and is a critical strategy for the nation moving forward. Because if we don't get people, even the most rural communities, online, they will never be able to take advantage of the digital agenda and be like Visi in the last slide, selling art to all over the world. Imagine if you could get people who live in the jungles of Borneo and get them the ability to transact with people anywhere in the world. That's really powerful. The other thing is the urban-rural gap in digital infrastructures in the states are also different. And what's really encouraging that we've seen over the last year is a lot of the state governments, like Pahang, like Penang, are really and even Johor are really taking the reins on their own and getting involved as well. So they all have digital agendas, digital initiatives. Some of them are actually starting funds to invest in startups. So it's kind of exciting to see how far they're going with that. So how can we accelerate the digital agenda? Firstly, we need to encourage the adoption of digital solutions. Secondly, develop talent for the jobs of tomorrow. And thirdly, we need to invest in the future. So adopting digital solutions firstly comes to society. There needs to be awareness that we bring for society to start using these digital solutions. And especially so in the M40 and B40 communities, because a lot of them don't actually see the need to do so. So part of our job as people who are developing solutions, who are in the marketplace, is to expose people to these solutions. Make our staff use them, make them use Grab to come to work, make them learn to deliver food to the office, make them learn to use Zoom. These are skills that I think are important. And if we need to, send them for training so that they learn how to use these solutions. Financial inclusion is going to be important. And what's really encouraging we're seeing in the market right now is all the e-wallets apps are doing really well. You can't actually go anywhere these days without using an e-wallet. Just 2 weeks ago, I went to a coffee shop, wanted to have coffee. They didn't accept cash. They didn't accept credit card. They only accepted an e-wallet. And I was like, wow, how far we have come. But what e-wallets do, and credit to the government for doing this, by making sure that everybody got like the 30 ringgit in the wallet, every single budget for the last couple of years they've been doing this, is that people are now using these services. And some of these e-wallets are going to be used for more than just transactions. They'll be used now for also things like finances, taking loans, investment. The Touch and Go e-wallet, for example, allows you to have a little savings program, and you get a bit of a return on the money you keep in the wallet. This is great, because if I was in the rural community before, I did not necessarily know how to set up a savings plan or invest in stocks or do that kind of participation in the financial economy because I didn't have the opportunity to. But these e-wallets actually are lowering the playing field, widening the reach to people who never got it before. The other thing is businesses need to adopt these digital solutions. We talked about it just now, so I won't belabor the point terribly. But basically, we need to encourage more people to use digital solutions and get more companies online. And not just in terms of encouraging SMEs, which is, I know, the focus of these kinds of conversations, but also encouraging corporate Malaysia to get involved in use digital solutions. And that may mean corporate Malaysia should also invest and bring aboard SMEs to work with them or startups to work with them. But I think that's the key to help this digitization move forward in the economy. And also government. Government needs to improve transparency through technology, upgrade tools and systems for efficiency, and enhance communication. It's good that we've got MySejahtera now as a tool, though it's technically not owned by the government. But it's something that is a step forward, right? Being able to utilize technology. But the key of technology is not just distribution, and it's not just speed. It's also transparency. And so whatever we do with technology needs to be managed so that all parties in the equation receive benefit for the use of technology. The next part, which is a huge thing that I'm really passionate about, as you can see, we've funded a couple of edtech companies at ScaleUp Malaysia, and we've also at Remote incubated one, is education. By the way, that's my daughter. That's her using the Ask Me app. But we must teach digital skills in schools, which is something that I'm really kind of getting antsy about, because we are seeing our neighbors starting to teach kids to code. In Thailand, it's a compulsory thing. In Singapore, kids are learning to code. In Malaysia, nothing. Not much. Every kid needs to code as a second language, because that's a language that they're going to use in jobs of the future. Do you know that for kids entering primary school today, 65% of them will work in jobs that do not exist yet? Let that sink in. 65% of jobs that exist today will not exist when the kid who joins primary school in, say, January 2022, graduate from school. So our education system needs to be able to train our children for the jobs of the future. And right now, this is a huge problem that we have. And we need to review our curriculum, because technology is rapidly changing. It's not enough for us to review the curriculum every 10 years. and then we launch a 10-year plan. We can't do that because technology changes every couple of years. So we need to review the curriculum every couple of years and maybe adapt the education system faster. I know it's easier said than done, but it's necessary, so we've got to figure out how to do it. The next thing is the workforce, right? They say in 10 years, 700 million jobs around the world will be displaced by automation in 10 years. So if you've got a son or a daughter who's entering the workforce today, you better hope that they're not in a job that's going to be replaced by automation in the next 10 years, because they're going to be out of a job soon, right? So we got to make sure that our workforce in Malaysia have a pathway to learn digital skills. And thankfully, there are bodies out there that do this. As you know, government also does this through the HRDF stuff. MDEC has a program for this. Also, there are private sector initiatives like General Assembly, Sarma Group has one, AirAsia also has one. But we also need to encourage more people to do it as a society. So if you've got family members or if you've got people you know in the workforce, encourage them to learn these digital tools, because in a couple of years, they may find their jobs displaced by a computer. Another thing I mentioned here is that this needs to be starting from the top. Leaders need to embrace technology. And that's really key in order for, and because we're in this room, the people who are leaders in your own organizations, you need to show that you're also learning. I'm going to learn AI. I'm going to learn a little bit about coding. Doesn't mean that you have to be proficient at it. Doesn't mean that you have to be really good at it. But you need to show that you're also upskilling and reskilling yourself in order for your staff to do it too. The other thing we should consider is importing more skills. And one of the things that I find really, really painful is whenever I talk to an entrepreneur and they've got a developer that wants to come to Malaysia, it's nearly impossible for that guy to come and work here. And this is a policy that we need to change. We need to make it super simple to bring talent into Malaysia. Because everybody agrees, Malaysia is one of the best places to live. Food is great, it's relatively cheap, but it's so difficult to get here and work here, right? And so if we can bring the talent here, this will encourage things like knowledge transfer, where a good skilled blockchain developer can teach Malaysian developers those skills. A good AI developer can transfer those skills over as well. So it's, I think, really important that we kind of bake that into the plans for the future by importing the skill set, because the knowledge transfer, I think, will be very powerful for the country. And finally, this is something that's very important, close to my heart, because this has become like our reason for being over the last couple of years, is really invest in digital technologies. Firstly, is invest in infrastructure. I appreciate the arguments that 5G is something that's for the future, but I think it's absolutely necessary, which is why I really enjoy the current debate that we're having around 5G technologies, which are happening in every major newspaper these days. But I think it's important because we need to get ahead of this. As a nation, we're going to be left behind if we do not adopt 5G. But we also need to balance this with connectivity for rural communities and make the playing field equitable for those in B40 communities as well. Another thing we need to invest in is 4IR, which is why I'm really encouraged that the government has set up Meranti, which is an agency to focus on 4IR and emerging technologies, right? Investing in early stage R&D in the universities, which is going to be key, as well as provide sandboxes and test beds for companies to try the technology. So I think it's really important. And the third one is to reduce the regulatory hurdles. We cannot be stuck in the past. We need to build technologies for the future. And I think this is something that we also can do if you're running a business, see how you can adopt some of these technologies in your business. And finally, startups, which is again very close, very, very close to my heart. There's always a talk about this magic, mythical creature called a unicorn, right? And one of the things that we always talk about is that, oh, where is Malaysia going to find its unicorns? And a lot of the conversation around finding these unicorns is around, let's look at the top companies in the country and double down on them, which I think is good. And arguably, we've got some of those companies in our portfolio at ScaleUp Malaysia, so obviously this benefits us to talk like this. But I also believe that the next big company in Malaysia is just starting now. And we need to find those guys. Grab is not that old a company, you know. And I put this because the headline says Malaysia born Grab, right? Because it tells us, and I want to avoid that whole, navel-gazing political conversation around this, but I want to emphasize the point that a Malaysian can build this. A Malaysian can build a $40 billion company. How many more Malaysians are out there that we haven't found yet. That is our opportunity in Malaysia. That's how we accelerate the digital economy. Grab is not just a listed entity with a market cap. Grab is also hundreds of thousands of jobs. Grab is also hundreds of millions of ringgit, and probably more, of economic value every month. Grab is economic changing. It changes the nature of the economy. And I want you to think about who are the next Anthony Tans and Hui Lings that we need to find out there. Because I think the next big thing is actually out there now. They're not in the ecosystem. We don't know who they are, and we need to find them. And for startups who are already in the ecosystem, we need to provide funding and support along the way. And that's kind of what we're doing at ScaleUp Malaysia. And I hope you can join us on this journey as we support these startups. And finally, I want to end on this point that one of the things that we learned from the Grab story is that Malaysian entrepreneurs are truly world-class. And I believe it's entrepreneurs who are going to truly propel the digital agenda forward. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you. You've been wonderful. I'll see you later. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Mr. Aaron Sharma. So inspiring, filled with lots of energy. Thank you for sharing the successes and congratulations on the achievements ScaleUp Malaysia has had despite the pandemic. Please allow me to introduce our final speaker for the day, Ms. Shafinas Farouk, partner in the workforce transformation at PwC Southeast Asia Consulting. She has 22 years of experience in advisory services and has worked extensively in both public and private sector organizations. She brings deep experience and technical capabilities in strategic organization development and transformation, performance management, and culture change implementation. Prior to PwC, she was the Managing Director of RTI International Malaysia, a global research-led advisory organization focusing on healthcare and innovation ecosystems. Her topic for today is Sustainable Workplaces, from Strategy to Culture. Ladies and gentlemen, kindly put your hands together for Ms. Shafinas Farouk, who will be delivering virtually.
Good morning, everyone. I'm just trying to get the internet clicker to work and it's not working at the moment. I'm going to need some help to change the slides, unfortunately. Very good morning to everyone. Thank you to MIM for the opportunity to speak at this event alongside an accomplished lineup of speakers. The subject of a sustainable culture as we emerge from a pandemic is certainly an important topic, and I hope to do it justice with some perspectives and points of view which could hopefully be of value to you as leaders, recognizing that this is Malaysia Institute of Management. May I have the next slide, please? So anybody who is a fan of Adam Grant, I don't know if you've heard of him, but he's a prolific writer and organizational psychologist from Wharton Business School. You might have come across one of his quotes, which states that the Great Resignation isn't a mad dash away from the office, it's the culmination of a long march to freedom. And indeed, many of the issues at work that we are seeing now are nothing new. They have simply moved to the forefront of what needs to change now and no longer nice to haves. For example, even before COVID, study after study on millennials showed that people wanted more flexibility and integration of life and work, and that they were more willing to give up a high-paying job than sacrifice their values and meaningful relationships. Led by the younger generation, people were beginning to question how they wanted to contribute and were willing to walk away when companies were not respectful of their individuality. But these were still considered the minority, and yes, I'll be the first to admit that we did at one time complain that the younger generation just didn't know what it takes to work hard, never ever quit, no matter how hard it gets. Remember those days? So countless seminars like these talked about the need to have employee engagement, about supportive relationships between leaders and employees, about the virtues of an emotionally intelligent leader, and so forth, until COVID came along and forced the issue. In a virtual work environment in which we were all forced into over the last couple of years, structures naturally flattened, while capabilities became critical as we gravitated towards results-focused teams. The companies that insisted on the same decision-making structures in a virtual setting were simply slower and had more frustrated and burnt-out teams. And with loss of hierarchy, leaders have had to grapple with new ways of working and leading teams. Trust in the workplace has now become central to a sustainable culture post-pandemic. May I have the next slide, please? So if you're wondering why culture matters, we've all heard about the Great Resignation, which I alluded to earlier when I talked about Adam Grant and his quote. And there are some lessons for us all. First of all, this is a global phenomenon and seems to be directly related to the aftershocks of being locked up at home. The numbers are staggering. Countless articles on LinkedIn and elsewhere have people trying to make sense of it. If you ask employees why they are leaving in droves at exit interviews, you will invariably hear about compensation, career growth, and training as some of the top reasons. But if you had a coffee chat with them and dig deeper, the past year or so was only the final push in a situation that was already untenable. For example, if you have an unhappy employee and they've been unhappy with their boss for some time, COVID-19 and all its challenges forced people to reconsider what's really important to me, what's going to make me satisfied in my job. And if another opportunity comes along and pays higher, then it makes sense for me to start fresh. So you've got the push factor and the pull factor working together. So it's very easy to say that compensation is going to fix it, when really there are some deeper issues that are clearly related to culture that needs to be understood and addressed. Next slide, please. We have the previous slide. Okay, there's one slide missing here. Yeah, here you go. So an overwhelming 86% of respondents in the study PwC did earlier this year, it's called a culture survey. It's an extension of a global culture survey, and we did the Malaysia version of it at PwC Malaysia. 86% of respondents agreed that organization culture must evolve. 75% think organization culture is an important topic on the agenda of senior leadership, but less people believe that people are acting consistently with what companies are saying what their culture is about. So given the clear messages that our people are telling us as they vote with their feet and just walk out the door, there is an urgency to this situation. On the next slide, we've heard a lot about ESG that's taking the global platform by storm, right? Well, the emphasis has always been on the E at the moment. As companies and the world make commitments on net zero, there is a growing attention on the social agenda. And make no mistake, this is not just about diversity and inclusion, which you've heard a lot about, and not just about diversity, but also on the inclusion side of diversity and inclusion. It is about the health and well-being of people, social justice, including the way we treat and pay our employees. It is simply good business to value our employees' well-being, and companies know this. Companies that really take the time to understand this are reaping the rewards of productivity, the ability to attract and retain the best talent, and more recently, the ability to attract capital as well. So, next slide, please. Hopefully, I've made the case that, sustainable culture is really important. It is good business. But where are we today? So PwC Malaysia, as I mentioned, conducted a culture survey in July 2021, and I wanted to show you some of these findings to just give you a sense of what's happening in companies. I've briefly mentioned how people are reassessing purpose in their work as we emerge from the pandemic. So this is an interesting finding. 80% of leaders feel connected to their organization's purpose, but only 57% of employees feel the same way. This represents a pretty large disconnect, something to definitely think about. Next slide. Have the next slide, please. Yeah. And if we ask these leaders, are they actually role modeling their stated purpose and values of the organization? 75% of them believe that they are doing that, but only half employees agree that they are walking the talk. So reading between the data, one could hypothesize that there could be a lack of trust by employees on what leaders are saying they believe in and what they actually do. And speaking of trust, on the next slide, almost 70% of leaders think that they are being open, but barely half of employees think so. This is on the next slide. Yeah. And on the following one, I've just got one more here. There is also a disconnect in terms of flexibility at the workplace. While employers and senior management believe that they are adopting flexibility, employees do not always agree that the flexibility is working for them. Just to underscore how important this is, PwC's Hopes and Fears survey, which was done slightly earlier than this particular one in April, reinforced the fact that about 1/3 of employees preferred a flexible working arrangement where they could contribute from any location. Now, remember the quote I mentioned about the long march to freedom? This represents the feeling of autonomy and being able to choose how I can contribute. So perhaps there's something that you are able to relate to. We are all doing that we can to adjust and cope with work from home policies and doing everything that we can to support our employees, but employees still want more. What's going on? What does flexibility actually mean then? What is it that we can do even more? So the huge disconnect that I've just demonstrated between senior leadership and employees on critical areas of work should give pause and cause to reflect on what's really going on. Clearly, workplace culture needs to be more sustainable and it needs to be aligned between leaders and employees. And we will need to adapt and adjust to the new realities of today. So, as we have seen, to do nothing on culture is just bad business. So let me try and demystify culture a little bit. I mean, we've heard the word a lot, and if I can have the next page, I propose a way of looking at it. Now, we've heard this word a lot, and sometimes if any of you are from finance here, you would probably snigger, right? And think, well, all this is just airy-fairy stuff. How do you even measure it? We are simply lucky if we get it right, and it's probably because of a good leader who makes it happen. And, it's by accident. Some say it's the soft stuff that encompasses the DNA of the organization, and it has something to do with how we do things here. So it's true that organization culture is hard to get right, and some companies take years. But I'd like to propose that organizational culture is actually about multiple levers that work in concert to produce the behaviors, beliefs, and attitudes. And what we see are the external realities of culture. If I can have that slide, slide 11, that would be very useful for me to explain this. Thank you. I'll just go right in and continue. Okay, so I mentioned that organization culture is about a few components at the same time. So often people will say, we need to change behaviors, we need to change the beliefs, we need to change the attitudes, but you cannot impact on behaviors directly. no matter how much you tell people to change how they behave, it is really a result of how people internalize their roles, the incentive systems are at work, the policies that the company has on collaboration, whistleblowing or diversity, and the list goes on, right? We are not able to look at it directly. But how do we create the conditions and affect the change using these different levers? I am going to propose that the most important component of all is great leadership. And we've heard about that from the beginning of today. But leaders are now under a lot of pressure. And which lever do I use at which time in order to create that culture that I want? Often people will look at performance management and rewards, and this is typically how we do it in the past, right? How can I create KPIs linked to rewards and compensation so that I can reward and punish people according to the behaviors that I want? But nowadays, as I've shown you in the previous results of the surveys, other things are at play here, and it's not enough. It's really important to look at how culture is impacted by the purpose you're communicating. What are we doing about including people in conversations? How are we being honest and transparent about feedback, about what's going wrong, about what's going right? How are we really being flexible? Are we truly being flexible? So there's a lot more pressure on the leader to create the organizational culture and resulting behaviors, beliefs, and attitudes that is what we call culture. So I'd like to focus on the next few slides on what leaders can do. And honestly, I don't have a lot of slides, but I thought that it'll be very important given the realities that we face today on what you can focus on. So the first slide, I think maybe a couple of slides down, is on purpose and values. So one is, it's worth reiterating the importance of purpose on an employee's mind these days, right? We can all relate to this. Do we wake up every day with a sense of mission? And are we able to hold our heads up high to say that we are doing good work and I feel aligned with my sense of integrity? Now, ESG is a big deal all over the world, and it's oftentimes said that the younger generation is leading the charge on this, right? But it's not enough to just talk about ESG. And again, the younger people are holding us accountable and saying, well, how are you walking the talk? Are you infusing it into the company's goals to represent, what you're actually doing every day? Having that purpose, how do you then translate it into roles and accountabilities, capabilities, and processes? The ability to translate this as an aspirational purpose into how you actually do work every day is going to be crucial, and employees, not just investors and public stakeholders, are looking for those to determine your commitment to the aspirations that you've just mentioned. And this is perhaps the reason why there is the disconnect that I've mentioned earlier. While leaders are saying, yes, we want to do this, employees are saying, nope, not enough is being done. So clearly, this is one of the opportunities that leaders have in making sure that you are aligned to your purpose. Now, another lever that you can use is on diversity and inclusion. I've mentioned about the inclusion bit in that equation. The pandemic has created isolation and underlined the basic human need to connect and be heard. Be heard is something very, very important these days. Employees need to feel like they matter. They're not just another box on your organization chart that needs to be filled. They're not just warm bodies that you need to push around to say, hey, we have a need here and we're going to put you here because we need to get this done now. So there are really a lot of gaps and opportunities for leaders to listen to them and perhaps to understand better what employees are grappling with on a... Okay, here we go. If you can go to the next slide. Maybe I'll just reiterate here that, while 73% of companies says that they are looking at sustainable development goals, only 20% included them in their published business strategy, which is unfortunate and represents the opportunity I mentioned, right? So and then the next thing I talked about is looking at diversity and inclusion, particularly on the issue of inclusion, listening to employees and making sure that they are being heard. And finally, maybe the last couple of slides, I know that the slides are an issue today, slide 15 and 16, is that how are we communicating or not communicating? So I want to make the case for over-communicating. You know, we have all been there, right? Getting a surprise resignation letter when we thought employees are actually happy. If leaders don't communicate or don't over-communicate, and this is in the previous slide, even a small lack of transparency or a perceived lack of transparency can lead to doubts and dissolve trust. Corporate silence combined with remote work can really amplify the wrong messages. Right? So a good example is on feedback. How clear are we in providing quality, fact-based, and honest feedback about how employees are doing so that they are not surprised and are managed about expectations regarding promotions and rewards? This has happened so often. They think they're doing well, and because we were afraid in providing that feedback, you know, we skirted around the issue, or we didn't over communicate again, how are you doing, or even ask how are you doing. Then at the end of the year they get really a big shock and they say, you know, trust is broken. I don't trust my employer, they're not telling me the truth, or there's something I don't know. So this is what happens when you don't over communicate. They make their own interpretations and they will leave. So this is again, you know, some of those issues that happen as root causes for the Great Resignation that you won't find out just by results in an exit interview. So I really encourage you to have those chats, one-on-one chats, and every person's needs are different. A working mother will have different needs compared to a new employee who is eager and looking at a variety of assignments that will help them grow their career. And the way to deal with them are very different. So situational leadership has never been more important than now. Finally, we've heard a lot about flexibility at work, and sometimes when we hear about sustainable workplaces, we think about flexibility first, but hopefully I've made the case that there are other forces and other components that are important here. And more than looking at various options in the flex work toolbox, understand what employees are really looking for. And as I mentioned, it's about freedom of choice, freedom to choose who they are. As an individual, everybody is different. The way they learn are different. You know, they may be introverts, some of them are extroverts. Some people perform individually better, some people perform better in groups. And so they're looking for that freedom to express themselves well. And make no mistake, they want to be there. They want to produce the results. They just do not want to be told necessarily how to do it. And I think, again, this goes back to the issue of trust. If you trust that who you've hired are great, capable people, and that they are adults and they know how to manage themselves, then creating the enabling conditions and giving them the flexibility to choose from among your toolbox and understanding what those needs could be for different people will work. Compared to just putting a cookie cutter approach and finding out that it doesn't create any impact at all. So finally, I just want to mention that employees are attracted to purpose, they are encouraged by a supportive work culture, and they stay for the longer term. Since we're talking about sustainability, they stay for the longer term because of the trust that they have in their leaders. And as leaders, we cannot deny that things are changing. We have to start adapting to the new ways of working. And that's all I have for my presentation. I apologize for the slides issue, but hopefully you have got something of value. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Shafinas Farouk, for sharing the cultural survey results carried out by PwC and how important situational leadership is for the new norm. And more importantly, how leaders have to build trust. So with that, we've come to the panel discussion. I would now like to call upon Mr. Aaron Sharma and Mr. Sivayanam to come up on stage and for the two remaining presenters who will be on virtual stage. The session will be moderated by our very own Mr. Sivayanam Rajaratnam, Chief Executive Officer of the Malaysian Institute of Management. Mr. Siva, over to you.
Thank you, Mr. Alam. And thank you, ladies and gentlemen. And first and foremost to Datuk Syed Ali, thank you so much for sharing your concerns on issues that the country is facing. And some of these issues you had previously been highlighting, especially the need now for political stability, proper and good governance, good leadership, and excellent strategies looking into the future. And Aaron, how digital adoption have accelerated opportunities, and you shared the three case studies. Thank you. And Ms. Shafinas for the sustainable culture and how it needs to evolve with leaders needing to walk the talk, right? And we had seen a diverse, what shall I say, age group, right? And we have the youngest, I believe you are the youngest in the whole lot. Right, so let's take some questions. And the first one being, what can be the biggest stumbling block for Malaysians to sail successfully beyond a pandemic, or to learn or live, as mentioned by Dr. Syed Ali? Is it a mindset change which is less susceptible to change, or corruption or corrupt institutions and leaders, political instability, or lack of willpower to execute action plans, or institutional distrust?
Are you asking me?
I think so. You'll be the best person to answer that.
Well, I think it's all of the above. I mean, I think the biggest stumbling block particularly is our political leadership now. Corruption is a big problem. But I mean, I must say that I don't think we truly understand what we are talking about here. We're not talking simply about corporate governance. We're not talking simply about economic growth and so on and so forth. I mean, this is a systemic problem. And if you don't address the systemic problems, you are not going to achieve any of the other things. I mean, I know, what's his name, Mr. Aaron, had a very nice slide presentation, a very nice optimistic talk. Everything was beautiful. I mean, it was good, I must say, but it doesn't address the systemic issues. I mean, all these things that you're talking about is very good. I mean, you are doing a lot of work helping all these mom and pop stores, the entrepreneurs and stuff like that. But as long as we don't address the issue of education, as long as we don't address the issue of institutional reform, all of the things that you are discussing, we are still going to be just end users. We are not going to be leaders in anything, including Ms. Shafinas just now. Also impressive talk, thank you very much. I see that you referred a lot to this issue of trust. In the end, though, in the final analysis, everything revolves around justice. I mean, now, as Ms. Shafinas was saying just now, that everything is revolving around ESG, the environment, the social, and the governmental. And all of this revolves around the idea of justice, environmental justice, social justice, governance justice. And if we don't have this justice, we are not going to achieve anything. We are not going to move forward. We are not going to prosper. We are not going to have desired economic growth, let alone high income status. And therefore, this is something that needs to be addressed. And the only way to address it is through institutional reform, particularly with regard to political reform, which we are not having, and unfortunately. I mean, I hate to be the voice of what some might say pessimism, but this is not really pessimism. What we are saying is we are optimistic about the future as long as we address these issues properly, in a proper manner. And the only way to do this, as I said, is education at the highest level first, at the universities. I mean, we can talk all we want about education in the primary and the tertiary and the secondary level, but even then, I find that this primary and secondary education system we have now, as Aaron clearly said,
Just when he was going to say something nice about me, he cut off, you know.
Yeah. No, there's a little lag. Okay.
No.
Okay.
No, I said the education system with regard to the primary and secondary education system is completely broken. I mean, why do we have these big examinations like SPM and the other one at Form 3, the one at Standard 5? I mean, I think it's ridiculous. It does not gauge learning. What we are doing is we are more going through the motion, let alone becoming innovative. We're not innovative at all. Look at the case of Africa. If anybody there can explain more clearly, perhaps. Look at Africa. Africa has got a high level of literacy. They have emphasized a lot on education, and yet they have no innovation at all. And this is what makes Africa suffer. Maybe you would like to elaborate on that.
Thank you, Dr. Syed. And I'll move on to the next question.
Would you mind if I just...
would you go ahead if you want to say something?
If I can just say a couple of things, right? I kind of agree with what Dr. Syed is also saying, right? And so if you... A lot of what I was saying about the digital inclusion and digital adoption of technology, in many ways is parallel to all this, right? Where I think the systemic reforms make it impossible for anybody to kind of move forward in society without having a cheat. And in some ways, the digital economy provides kind of a leapfrog point, right? But ultimately, speaking of frogs, the average Malaysian is kind of like a boiling frog, right? Where we know that there are problems, but there's no way for us to make these changes, right? Which is why I was quite excited by what Nazir was saying earlier about having some sort of way to kind of make these systemic changes. Because I agree, if we don't make a lot of these changes, we're in a lot of trouble and we're going to be left behind. And the biggest change that needs to happen is in that element of education, because actually, and just to push back on the point of that we don't innovate, I do think we do innovate. We've got guys like, I mean, I know it's not so popular these days, but like Tony Fernandez created a large airline out of this part of the world, Malaysian entrepreneur. Anthony Tan is a Malaysian entrepreneur, built a $40 billion company. And to caveat and also to support Dr. Syed's point as well, both of these guys were educated out of Malaysia. So it shows that the quality of the individuals are strong, but if we improve the education system in the country, we can make more people like this. Otherwise, the only way we're going to have innovative entrepreneurs is we'll have to, send them abroad to study and then bring them back and hope they build something here. Yeah.
Thank you. Shafinas, you want to share something?
Yeah, I think just a small point about resistance to change, right? Just talking about the private sector and how companies are dealing with the changes. I think we talked about systemic reforms, but at the company level, some leaders are still thinking that maybe things will get back to normal soon. We're just waiting for that to happen. Even if they've gone virtual, how do we replicate how things used to be in the virtual world? So as long as you're still thinking and waiting for things to go back to the way it was, then you're going to be slow in developing the capabilities we need, hiring the right people, changing your purpose, and doing all the things necessary to move forward. So I just wanted to make that point here.
Yeah. On a similar note, there is another question from one of our virtual audience, and he's asking, what's your view on leaders' resilience during tiring times? And this is for Safinas.
Resilient leaders I guess leaders are just as tired as employees.
Thank you.
Change after change. I mean, it's very important to think about leaders themselves and whether they are getting enough rest and ability to step back and think what's really going to be important here. So Now more than ever, you can see that it's not just about technical capabilities, but it's about your attitudes, your beliefs, being able to look beyond and see the opportunity in what's happening. But it's not easy, but
Yeah.
it's critical.
Yeah, these are really tiring times, and perhaps I would like to ask the audience whether you have any questions. Somebody? Imran, you always have a lot of questions. It's not here. Right, if none, then we'll move on. All right, there is another question here, is that this is going back to school again. According to a report by UNICEF, since the beginning of the pandemic, an estimated 1.6 billion learners in 199 countries worldwide were affected by school closures. In Malaysia, though schools have reopened over the last few weeks, it is still not back to normal. Our children, grandchildren have been one of the most affected from the COVID-19. Based on your respective topics today, what should be done differently to help children navigate the next few months in the most effective way?
Are you asking me again?
Yes, Datuk.
I'm sorry, could you repeat the question?
I'll repeat that. According to a report by UNICEF, since the beginning of the pandemic, an estimated 1.6 billion learners in 199 countries worldwide were affected by school closures. In Malaysia, though schools have reopened over the past few weeks, it is still not back to normal. Our children, our grandchildren have been one of the most affected from the COVID-19. Based on your respective topics that you have spoken today, what should be done differently to help children navigate the next few months in the most effective way?
Well, based on my respective topic,
Yes,
as
yes.
I said, this digital agenda does not address the fundamental systemic failures we are facing. And therefore still, I mean, whether you open the school or not, the children are still going to have problems because the system is still the same. No one has acknowledged the fact that the system is completely broken. No one has come up and said, you know, we've got to change the system. We've got to radically change it. No one has said anything like that. So it doesn't matter whether in the next few months or not, if the system does not change, it's going to be the same problem over and over and over again. And we've spoken about this for years. It doesn't change.
And based on what you're saying, it looks like it may not even change for the next couple of months or maybe a year or so.
I mean, that's very optimistic, isn't it?
Yeah. Aaron?
I have a couple of thoughts, if possible.
Go ahead, Shafinas.
I'll just jump in. Speaking of systemic change, I think one of the things that needs to be addressed is underprivileged children, right? They have been, I think, especially affected by what has happened by COVID-19. I mean, even before the pandemic, there were some issues on access, on equity. And the COVID-19 situation just made that so much worse. Some of them have lost parents, family. So there's the mental well-being aspect as well to think about. So I feel really strongly about this, and being somebody who watches the education sector quite closely, I feel like if we were to look at systemic reforms, then what are we doing about underprivileged children and how education must strive to reduce the access and equity problem that we see?
Yeah, I agree.
Aaron, you want Aaron?
Yeah, I think there are two types of discussions we can have when it comes to the question that the person's asking, right? The first is what my fellow panelists are also addressing, which is the systemic issues, right? Where what is being taught in school, how is it being delivered, what is the net outcome of 11 years of education? What is the net outcome of tertiary education? I think these are, it's in the systemic level, and I guess you also will address issues of who gets access to local universities and such with that kind of discussion, right? So, and I think I completely agree with what my two panelists are also saying, because I think that's pretty valid. But there's also the other layer, which is the execution layer that also is part of the question as well, right? It's the schools closing, schools reopening. Are they opening? What's going to happen? Are they going to be doing it remote studies? Are they going to go to class? If they go to class, will somebody get COVID and then it shuts down again? So I think maybe the systemic question is something that requires real leadership in the government and in our leaders to push through. But certainly the execution level is something that I think at the school level, we can certainly address now. Right? Because we should not be thinking that things are going to magically come back to normal in 3 months. Because we've seen this movie before. We thought 2021 would be the year we all go back to school and that goes back to normal. And yet there's always like a Delta, now there's Omicron, there's, in 3 months there'll be another thing, right? So maybe the better approach is to think of what is the better way to deliver the education to the students so that there's no shortfall. And the current way that a lot of schools are doing it is Band-Aid approach. So they'll do some sort of half-baked Google Classroom, Zoom kind of setup where it's not the best delivery, and then the students are expected to do it, and then those in B40 communities will suffer the most. What we need is something intermediate now. Like, is there some way we can deliver education in a consistent way with the same quality they would get if they were in the classroom, and helping the kids who maybe cannot afford an iPad or a computer also get access to that we can do now already. And I think that's something that we can maybe address even among our communities and in our schools.
Yeah.
Excuse me, Mr. Siva, there's one thing.
Go ahead.
I mean, you were asking the question based on the presentation, not about the what we can do now. Now, if you ask me that question, what we can do now, it's a bit complicated because this COVID problem, I feel that it has not been addressed properly in the first place. We've had lockdown upon lockdown upon lockdown, 3 lockdowns already.
Absolutely.
We've had the vaccination program. We've had all this digital apps and everything like that, like you said, Aaron, about how we can go into shops and how we can run our daily life now is becoming very difficult. And the minister has made it very clear that he's going to make it more difficult for people who are not either digitally connected or who have not been vaccinated. So this is a big problem now. We have not done testing in a very big way like other countries have done. We have not done proper research when it comes to the safety and the efficacy of the vaccine like other countries have done. When we have asked for published peer-reviewed reports about these things, we have always been told that they are on the way, but they have not been coming. We don't know much about these vaccines. We know there's a difference between the new technology vaccines and the traditional vaccines. We know that. And we know also that the safer of the 2 options is the traditional vaccines. But then that traditional vaccine has a caveat. If you want to travel, you have to have a certain kind of vaccine in order to go to Western countries. Therefore, it's very difficult to move around. Now, if we had done rigorous testing from the very beginning, and if we had adopted other strategies where, like I mentioned before, like what Japan has done with the anti-parasitic medications that have shown and proven to be effective in reducing the viral count in people who are infected with this disease and who are not hospitalized because of it. This also is true for certain states in India. So why is Malaysia not doing this? Now, if Malaysia has done this, then we can say that the schools should be reopened, that we should be doing more testing, test every week, and those who are infected or who show a positive test on this, they can either opt to receive these antiviral medications which reduce the viral count in the patient itself, or they can go for the vaccine. Either way. But the vaccine also is a failure because it doesn't know how long it can protect us for. It's like the flu vaccine. Every year you have to go and get one. Therefore, now we have to think, instead of thinking we can eradicate it, like what Malaysia loves to think, we can be the champion of everything. We need to start thinking about how to manage this because it looks like This disease is going to be around for quite a while, like the flu. The flu we get every year. The same thing with this COVID. It doesn't matter what kind of variant comes our way. This is what the media now and science tries to scare people with. This is a fear-mongering thing. If this anti-parasitic drug reduces the viral count of the COVID, in other words, the coronavirus itself, it doesn't matter what variant comes about, because it'll still be reducing the viral count. It's like the genus and species argument.
Yeah.
So I think that's what should be done. If you want to open the schools, that's what should be done. You open the school, you do rigorous testing every week, and you give the option like this, instead of trying to think about a mandate and forcing people, because this is not good. This is dividing our society. And what Shafina said just now about the social culture, especially when it comes to this ESG thing, society. We have a very divided society now, and it has only been emphasized because of COVID. Before we didn't really see this, but COVID has allowed us to see how big of a division we have.
Yeah, you're absolutely right, and noted on your point, Dr. Syed. And also, on a similar note is that, we talked about execution. We've been always talking about, the inability to execute the great plans, the great blueprints that we have. And just now, Dr. Syed Ali mentioned about having proper management skills. If you recall, you talked about having proper management skills, and what is needed is good qualified human capital. What in your opinion, what do you think? Do we have that kind of capability still available with us?
So I think we do have a working class or like a middle management tier in the country that's actually quite capable, but it's thinning, because a lot of them are looking for opportunities outside the country already, right? And so I think one thing that's important is to ensure that corporations are able to retain this talent in the country by providing them access to more better incomes, better lifestyles by working for these companies, right? So I do think we have talent. I don't think it's enough. And I think what we really need to focus on is attracting talent, because I think countries like Singapore and Thailand are doing really, really good jobs of making it very conducive for great talent to decide to call those places home. And our only go-to every time is, we got better food. But I don't think that's good enough, right? I think it needs to be ease of work, ease of getting visas, ease of getting kids to school. That's the way we can attract the best talent to the country.
Here we're looking at attracting the talents, and how about developing talents within the country? Shafina, you have some thoughts on that?
Yes, exactly. I think you hit right on the topic that I was going to talk about. I think besides attracting, it's about developing people that we already have. Critical to that, though, is understanding where we are versus where we want to go. So we talked about ESG, we talked about digital transformation. Aaron, you had a great presentation on that. And I remember the point you made that how many people actually know how to use these technologies. So understanding where we are and what's going to be priority in terms of capability development and developing those plans systematically are going to be important. And the private sector will need to lead this. So absolutely agree that besides attracting people, it's about developing the skills and behavioral competencies to develop the trust that I mentioned earlier.
Thank you, Shafinas. And I have a gentleman who's been waiting here. Could you mention your name and then?
Hi, my name is Chen Zhen. So I'm a Gen Z. So my questions are going to be on behalf of Generation Z. So I have two questions. The first one is to Dr. Syed. So you mentioned a lot about the systemic issues, right? And a lot of, I think that, as Gen Z, a lot of times we have inherited these issues. So what is the role of the young people, to address some of these issues? So that's the first question. Second question towards Shafinas. So I see a lot of my friends, going to the gig economy and not wanting to work in organizations. So how can organizations, align themselves to the needs and the preferences of Gen Z to retain these talent?
Your question was about what is the role of Gen Z? Is that right?
Yes, to solve some of these systemic issues that you mentioned.
Well, education, obviously. I think education is the thing that is very important. And of course, Gen Z is the future. And it depends on how educated they are in order for us to move forward as a nation. But let's just digress a little bit. We have put so much emphasis on this STEM, science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. A lot of emphasis on that. But we haven't put any emphasis, rather, on the humanities. And I think this is a big mistake, because for the Generation Z, for the younger upcoming leaders, they need to also be very well versed in the humanities. Now, why is this important? Is it because this humanities is what leadership is born from? The same thing with innovation. Innovation it comes from the humanities. It does not come from the STEM subjects in reality. Now, there is a study done about what's happening in Ivy League universities in the US. 40% of the students who were wanting to attend Ivy League universities were left disappointed because they found out that these Ivy League universities had decided to close the humanities faculties. And therefore, these students were looking elsewhere to go and study things like literature, history, ethics, philosophy, these kind of important subjects. They were disappointed. Now, Malaysia had the impetus, I would say, to attract these students to come to Malaysian universities to study the humanities here. And yet, in Malaysia, we decided we are going to close the humanities as well, that we are not really thinking about relevancy. There was no more relevancy for philosophy. There was no more relevancy for history. There was no more relevance for literature. And yet we are a country of multiracial, multi-religious, multilingual people. And therefore it is a very important subject and a very important thing to tackle, especially when it comes to the social cohesion. So for a person like you from this younger generation, I'm sure you feel a certain amount of disconnect as well. Not because of your education status, but because of your either religious or cultural or social status. Am I correct? I'm sorry, did you, yes?
Yes. Yep.
Yeah, you see? Because now it seems like there is one branch of extremism shouting about their individual culture, religion, and tradition, while ignoring the others. Now, I think this part of the humanities is important. We need to study our literature. We need to study our philosophy. We need to study our language. We don't have to start arguing about whether we should teach science in Malay or in English. Science should be taught in Malay. Science should be taught in English. This is an international subject. It is not a localized subject. We don't have the proper terminology, first of all, in the Malay language to teach science. A lot of the terminologies in pure sciences are from Latin, and therefore it's more reasonable to think that we should study in English. The other point is, what about our language itself? Why do we argue about vernacular schools versus the national schools? If vernacular schools are doing well in their own language and the public schools in the Malay language are not doing well, why do we start thinking we should close the Chinese schools or the Indian schools down? We should start thinking about repairing the national schools. That's the problem. We are ignoring the forest for the trees. I think that's enough for now.
Thank you.
Thank
so
you.
It sounds like it's we should be the change and educate ourselves and prepare for when we take over the world.
No, I mean the future is the change. I mean, what I'm saying now, of course, we are also the future. It's not that I'm a different generation and therefore I don't matter. Of course not. I mean, we are the ones who are supposed to educate the younger generation. But if we ourselves have a problem with our own knowledge, with our own education, how do we expect the younger generation to lead in a proper manner? I mean, today we've heard a lot about corruption, and whenever we say corruption, we think, oh, this must be referring to bribery, etc. But that's not what we mean. We mean a corruption of knowledge. Our knowledge has already become corrupted. Look at the science of today. Science is not the same thing as technology, and yet we say it in the same sentence. Science is fact-based, they say, as if reason and knowledge is not based on fact. Now, fact can also be wrong, isn't it? The science that fact uses can be wrong. But that's not the same thing for reason. If your reason is not sound and valid, you cannot arrive at a correct conclusion. But that's not the same thing about science. I mean, this is a very deep philosophical question, and a very philosophical answer needs hours to explain this.
Thank you, Dr. Syed. And you have another question?
My second question to Shafinas was about,
Thank you for the question. I think I have a slightly radical point of view on the gig economy, which many of my fellow leaders may or may not agree with. I think we should absolutely encourage it. I think the gig economy is actually a reflection of what younger people and actually everyone wants in terms of flexibility and autonomy and wanting to have purpose in what they're doing and not just work, right? In the past, I think there have been some debates about contract for services versus permanent work. And here we can see the gig economy is bringing that up again with a lot of emphasis. In the gig economy, you work for services. You have a particular set of results to achieve and you get paid for that. So it's forcing companies to be clear on what results do they want, how do I understand what capabilities do I need, and it's creating an economy of workers that are focused on capabilities. So I can only think that this is a good development. Now, for companies to thrive, they should not be saying, how do I avoid this from happening? How do I avoid people from gaining the skills and leaving me? They should be celebrating it and looking at how to provide choices that Generation Z and others are looking for. So it's a great challenge to have, and I think that the gig economy is forcing leaders to think differently about jobs.
All right, thank you.
Shenzhen, I hope you're happy with the answers.
Yes, thank you very much.
Thank you, Shenzhen. And I've got a question from one of our virtual participants, and this is to Dr. Syed Ali. How can we filter valid concerns on vaccines and misinformation about vaccines that are circulating on social media? My view is that valid concerns on vaccines are often used by disingenuous individuals to spread fears about vaccine, which may delay recovery or making the virus endemic.
Yes, I agree with that. I mean, I think that, like I said in my presentation just now, at what point do the media giants become authorities on what is false or what is fake and what is misinformation? I mean, again, how do we solve this problem? The questioner asked is, you have to have knowledge. I mean, I'm not against getting vaccinated, but I have concerns and I have voiced those concerns. And because I voiced those concerns, suddenly I was labeled an anti-vaxxer. I'm not an anti-vaxxer. I just have concerns about this new technology. I'm not worried about the traditional vaccines. I'm concerned about the new technology vaccines. And keep in mind that this is not something that is new, in other words, just because of this pandemic. This has been going on for decades, this research into this new technological mRNA vaccine technologies. But the COVID vaccine brought it into existence faster. Therefore, it was, in my opinion, quite opportunistic to have all of a sudden this, this vaccine, which touted as being 96% effective, when in reality it is not. That the data shows us this. And therefore, the concerns are valid. But I think that the people who have these concerns should not be demonized. On the contrary, they should be engaged. They should also have clear and valid explanations given to them, which is not being done by the government. On the contrary, they are more or less strong-arming people into thinking that their way is the right way. They are the ones who know what is valid, what is not valid. They are the ones who can deem something to be fake and something to be misinformation. I mean, I think that's a big, I mean, to use the word dictatorship is a bit severe, but it does. Therefore, I think we should be very careful, and we should arm ourselves with knowledge, proper knowledge. And I mean, if for instance, these anti-parasitic drugs are also effective, why are we not using them, or why are we not even researching them? Instead, we give some very feeble excuse about the side effect of the anti-parasitic drugs, that it causes, sorry to use this word, but causes diarrhea. I mean, for heaven's sakes, if you buy any medicine and you look at the possible side effects, one of them is diarrhea. If the other concern is, well, this parasitic medicine was meant for animals, do they not realize that most medications were tested on animals before they were used in human beings? What's the problem? Then you bring in the Muslim scholar or the so-called ulama who comes and says to you about the haram halal issue. I mean, that should not even play. It should not even be part of the discussion. But we should be a little bit more circumspect. We should not be so authoritarian in our management of this crisis. I mean, and it is a crisis that is not even showing any signs of abating. I mean, this vaccination program, even though it has been semi-effective, we are not seeing the numbers drastically reduce like we are in Japan. And why? What's the difference? Therefore, we need to study that. And as far as I know, it's because Japan has instituted a program of allowing doctors to freely prescribe without restrictions these anti-parasitic medication. So, I mean, what is Malaysian government going to do about that? Instead of increasing the shelf life of a vaccine all of a sudden.
Thank you, Dr. Syed. And I have one question. This is again going back to leadership and implementation of strategies, etc. This morning we had Tan Sri Nazir with us, and he was talking about having the national consultative committees similar to those that was initially set up during the early days, somewhere in 1970s. So the question to all the panelists is, what's your view on Better Malaysia Assembly proposed by Tan Sri Nazir? Is it sufficient at the first step for the purposes of structural reform, or much should be done? Anybody?
You want to answer that?
Yes. Would you like to answer that?
No, I mean, I think, of course, a consultative council is welcome, perhaps at this point, but as far as the leadership of who leads this consultative council is still questionable and debatable. I mean, I don't think, for instance, look at our history. We have had the 1997 Asian economic crisis, the 2008 global financial crisis, and therefore now for a banker to propose a consultative council which is led by, I presume, bankers and economists, I don't think that is sufficient. If you don't include as well people who know and know they know, you are not going to succeed. You are just going to scratch the surface, which is what is quite common in Malaysia. We just like to do that. It's like put a plaster or a band-aid on a problem and forget about it. I mean, again, I don't want to be the voice of so-called pessimism, but again, we are optimistic that there is a better way. And we have been talking about this over and over and over again. I remember last time when we had a discussion at Sunway University before this pandemic, it was a few years before the pandemic, and they invited the Minister of Education to come and talk about reform. And I was there asking the Minister of Education, Do you think that reform simply means that we change the color of the shoes and lighten the school bag? That is not reform. Reform is about the systemic reform. What kind of curriculum are we having? I mean, I was talking about this before, that instead of increasing the number of subjects like we have done, we need to be reducing them. Less is more, actually. We need to think of a proper strategy from primary school, how to educate the children. And the Malay civilization has a very, very clear method of teaching how people should think. This is also true for the Mandarins as well as for the Aryan. And we are not studying any of them. On the contrary, we are not a country that hates knowledge and education. On the contrary, we are the kind who would rather prefer to sweep the surface and forget about the dust and the rubble and the filth around us.
You want to say something?
Sure.
No.
So, I mean, I was here for the speech, and I thought what Tan Sri said was very compelling in the sense that there's a conversation that can be had in a somewhat public way about these systemic issues, which I think we don't have, right? And like the gentleman who asked about the Gen Z issues, right? I think a whole bunch of Gen Z people are disenfranchised and they don't have any platform to speak, which is why earlier my question to Tan Sri was, how do we ensure, first of all, that there's some sort of transparency, but maybe that was not the best way to describe it. Most, how do we ensure like a broad-based participation in these conversations, right? Because otherwise, it's going to be just a couple of people talking about it in a closed room. Nobody really knows about it. They'll come out like saviors, and then everybody's going to take their turn taking it apart and criticizing it, right? It needs to be done in a way that engages the broader population. The other thing is to ensure it's enforceable, right? Like like we were talking just now, right? In my talk as well, we're a country that's very good at blueprints, right? But a blueprint is a beautiful document, will engage a great company like Shafina's company like PwC to write it for us, but then ultimately if we don't do it, it doesn't go anywhere, right? So we need to make sure that if we're going to go down this path, that there's a way to make sure it's executed. But ultimately, I think beyond the idea, what we need is leadership, right? We need, and again, beyond even technology or beyond anything that we talked about before, we need people, and people follow people, right? And so I think I echoed Dr. Syed's point as well, right? Is who's going to lead it? Who are the faces of this thing? And are these faces the faces that the man on the street will want to follow and listen to and get behind the ideas? Because if you have the wrong spokesperson for it, it's not going to go very far anyway.
Yeah. You have to have knowledge. This is very important. And like I said many, many times before, the quality of a leader is this. When he speaks the truth. When he's given a trust, he doesn't betray that trust. When he makes a promise, he doesn't break that promise. If we find that in leaders, then we need to follow them. Do we find that in leaders today? We can't say that we do, can we? Therefore, the question about who is going to lead is a very valid question. And the person who leads has to have knowledge. But again, in terms of these corporate giants, in terms of the university executives, they are not doing the job properly.
Thank you so much, Dr. Syed, for that clarity, and then you've come very strongly, and then you've really enforced that, what leaders need to have. And I think you've summed it up so beautifully, what it needs. It needs leadership, it needs that kind of trust. And with that, I think we would like to end this session. I want to thank each and every one of you so much for joining today, and for the participants who are here, and all our virtual participants. Thank you so much. And
thank you very much.
Thank you. And I'd like to hand over to Ms. Stella.
Thank you, Mr. Siva. Let us give all three panelists and Mr. Siva Yanam a round of applause for the wonderful insights shared during the panel discussion, and for responding to the questions received from our audience and those that are on virtual. Before we end the program today, the Malaysian Institute of Management would like to present a token of appreciation virtually to Yang Berbahagia Datuk Dr. Syed Ali Tawfik Al-Attas. The next recipient will be Mr. Aaron Sharma. If you can, yeah. And last but not least, Ms. Shafinas Farouk. Thank you very much, Mr. Siva Yanam and Mr. Aaron Sharma. Appreciate it. Ladies and gentlemen, we have now come to the end of the program. We would like to thank each and every one of you present here today, and for our 300 attendees on virtual platform for your kind patience and for staying true. I would also like to take this opportunity to once again thank our main sponsor and collaborative partner, Konrad Adenauer Stiftung, and supporting partners, Federation of Public Listed Companies Berhad, FPLC, the Malaysian Insurance Institute, MII, and Bank Pembangunan Malaysia Berhad for their continuous support. It's been our pleasure to host this event and have a lovely day ahead. Lunch is served at the latest recipe restaurant, which is situated on the ground floor for lunch. Thank you everyone and stay safe.